welcome back to another live stream. And today we have a very special thing to watch. So, today, uh, two NASA astronauts, Bob Behnken and Doug Hurley, will be returning back to Earth to their homes. And why is this special? This is special because, first of all, this is done by the rocket company SpaceX, which is one of my favorite private rocket company. And another thing is uh, they will be returning back. This thing will be happening after so long, around 9 years. That American rockets and American spacecraft is returning back American astronauts. So yeah, that's what is exciting. Another thing which is exciting is the flag which they will be taking uh, taking and coming back to Earth, which was left by the previous crew around 9 years ago. So yeah, that's one thing. So guys, here we are. As you can see, this is how a picture from the ISS looked like. This is the Dragon 2 spacecraft itself. You can see here docked with the International Space Station. Here is the STV vehicle of JAXA, the Japanese Aerospace Agency, which is a cargo vehicle. This is a Crew Dragon, means a crew vehicle. So today what will happen, uh, how it will happen, I'll explain you each and everything one by one. So guys, here we are, as you can see right now. So if you don't know about SpaceX, let me just tell you in a brief thing that it is a private rocket company which has revolutionized the space industry by bringing down the launch cost and by being the first and the only operational company which reuses its rockets for the first stage. So yeah, that's the thing. So let's just have a look at now the Dragon capsule itself, how the Dragon capsule is and what it has in store for us. So as you can see guys, in total we have 23 total launches and 22 visits to the ISS and 9 reflown. Okay, so one mission was why only 22 and why total launches 23? Because one mission was a failure in which uh, there was some problem with the helium pressurization, and that causes explosion in the Falcon 9 rocket. That's why it wasn't able to. But yeah, that's the thing. But the thing is, 9 reflown missions are there. So here is the Dragon spacecraft. As you can see guys, this is a real life, you can say, scale of those things. So let me explain you each and everything right here. So right now the white thing which you are seeing here are the radiator panels. These panels are required so as to radiate all the heats generated by the spacecraft, as well as the from the if any radiation heating is there, anything, everything, this radiator will radiate into the space. Okay, so this is white thing is the radiator, and now this blue thing are the solar panels. These solar panels are obviously required because how it will power itself, how it will make itself healthy then, right? So these solar panels, these blue thing make sure that it has a proper power supply. Then these are these windows, these small are the windows, these are the Draco thrusters, and here we have the super Draco thrusters. So I'll tell you each and everything about in details. So right now, as you can see guys, the launch payload mass is around 6 tons here, as we can see at the 6 tons, and the return payload mass is 3 tons. So why is it 3 tons and return is 3 tons and normally 6 tons? Because they deliver the cargo, so obviously the weight is reduced. And also the 3 tons weight, if I am not wrong, in the okay, I'll tell you what I'm saying. So here we have the Dragon trunk. The Dragon trunk not only carries unpressurized cargo, as you can see it carries unpressurized cargo. So whatever waste is generated from the rocket, they must be sorry, the waste generated from the ISS, which they don't need now. So they just put all those things in this trunk for the returning mission, and then this trunk is jettisoned before re-entering the atmosphere. So you can say after that it will burn up in the atmosphere. So yeah. Um then we have here the capsule. So capsule have, as you can see, it has 8 super Draco thrusters. These are the super Draco thruster which is used for abort system. If anything wrong happens during the flight, then these super Draco thrusters during the ascent, mainly these super Draco thrusters will fire up and work as a launch abort system. Okay, and these are the normal Draco thrusters, which is used for controlling the altitude. So this is the launch abort. It produces 71 kilonewton of thrust, and we have 8 engines for that. And then these are the Draco thrusters, which produce 400 newton of thrust, and this is used for apogee, perigee maneuvers, orbit adjustment, and all attitude control and all. So whatever deorbit maneuver will happen, that will happen from these only. So guys, we should have a watch at the Crew Dragon interior if you haven't seen it right now. So we can have a look at that. It is so sci-fi and futuristic. This spacecraft, it looks like it is made in 21st century, right? This is so amazing to see all those things. And finally, yeah, the touch screen. How can I forget the touch screen? Uh, the touch screen is the, you can say, the highlight of this spacecraft, because till now you will be surprised. Uh, we didn't have any touchscreen on the spacecraft right till now. We had touchscreen on the mobile, but under the space technology, we didn't have that. Because why? And the obvious reason is that because touchscreens are not reliable as the traditional thinking goes. But SpaceX is not looking towards that. As you can see, touchscreen was there, and the interiors were so cool and so sci-fi related, right? And yeah, this is how the spacesuit looks like, guys. The spacesuit itself is very cool to see and to have a look. And then we have the engines. So here we have, guys, the Draco thrusters, which is we already know. We have 16 of them, 16 Draco thrusters, which produces 400 newton, and this the Super Draco thruster. This is how the Super Draco thrusters look like, and it has 8 of them. And these is in the unlikely event of an emergency, the 8 Super Draco engines can power Dragon half a mile from the launch vehicle in less than 8 seconds. So that's the thing. And yeah, so guys, now we can have a look at the mission profile itself. Um Mission profile itself. Okay. So, sorry, guys, I forgot about the. Thank you for telling me. Now, volume is must be right now. Is it right? Okay, so we can have a look at the mission profile itself. uh, how does it dock and undock and what will happen? So guys, uh, this is how everything looks like. So first of all, this one is the departure burn, which will happen autonomously by the Dragon spacecraft. Okay, this will undock from it, from here, and we'll have a departure burn. If you can see it right now, you must not be able to see it, but there are thrusters in the docking side only also. Basically, we don't have thrusters. Not only have thrusters as Draco thrusters and Super Draco thrusters, but we do also have thrusters here on the you can say the docking side, which is used for departure burn. As you can see, one. So here the departure burn will happen. Departure burn will basically keep make the spacecraft uh, away take the spacecraft away from the ISS, which will basically keep out sphere. As you can see, it will take this away from there. And then finally, after this, two is the phasing burns. Phasing burns are basically used to lower the orbit. Right now the orbit of the ISS is around 400 kilometers, so it will lower the orbit and take the orbit perigee, if I am not wrong, to a certain height. Okay, then after that, at 3 part, here at 3, the trunk will jettison. So this is very interesting to note that the trunk will be jettisoned before the deorbit burn. Now right now we didn't have any deorbit burn, we have just lowered the orbit. Now at third, here we will jettison the trunk, and this is done so as to reduce the payload mass, and so that it can so the fuel is required less for the final deorbit one, and hence on fourth, here the final deorbit one takes place, and then here we have a re-entry, which in which all those plasma and all those hot temperatures endured by the spacecraft. And then finally we have a parachutes deploy. First the two drop parachutes will deploy, then we have four main parachutes. Those two drop parachutes will cut, and then we have four main parachute which will deploy when we have reached a safe speed, and those four parachutes will make the Dragon 2 to take a splashdown, and hence everything will be come to an end. So that's how, if everything goes as per the plan, then we will be able to see the landing, and not the landing but the splashdown. So it will be thing to watch. So as you can see, guys, uh, here we have the Dragon autonomously undocks from the internet. So this August 1, we have this thing, we have the departure burn and all, undocking and departure burn. But the next day, the total coast time, or you can say the orbit maneuvering time, is around 19 hours. So next day on August 2, finally we'll be seeing the splashdown. So that's the thing here. Okay, today we won't be seeing the splashdown. Basically, right now today we will just be seeing the undocking part and how the spacecraft moves from the ISS, and everything is looking good or not, and everything is working cool. So yeah, that's the thing. And this 19-hour thing will reduce after that. Basically, right now only the 19-hour is there. After that, once this is all successful, then the in actual crew one mission which will happen, the 19-hour journey will not be there. They are doing this for the first time because they need to test every and each and every system so that they work perfectly. So now, guys, if you don't know about the what has happened till now, I have a short animation to show you guys. um, so I'll play that, and you can see that then. Guys, is the volume right? Correct? If I'm not wrong, it is correct. Okay, cool. So here we have. So this what happened. This is the animation, guys. Like these two astronauts boarded the Tesla Model X for their departure to the launch pad, and then this is the the launch access arm.
Countdown now. Pad is cleared. Go for launch.
10, 9, 8,
And then
7,
finally the
6,
rocket launch.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Ignition, liftoff.
Those 9 Merlin engines burned up, and we were able to finally first stage
Separation confirmed.
exactly.
Back ignition.
Dragons
Dragon, separation confirmed.
exactly. And now it is approaching the ISS for docking. So it stayed there for around 2 months. The docking occurred in June and July, June 1st, you can say. So June and July they stayed there, and August 1st they are returning back.
Separation separation visually confirmed.
So this is what we will be seeing right now, guys. The undocking part, which is happening right now. And finally the trunk jettison. There and the re-entry. Rogue parachutes.
Mains have been deployed.
And so guys, this is what we had a look at. So yeah, wait a sec, just a sec, guys. Um, so we are just waiting for, oh yeah.
Location and one final deorbit burn. Their trip home will also include an 8-hour sleep period later tonight, where both crew members will be able to get some rest before their arrival back on Earth tomorrow after a little more than 2 months in space. Dragon is targeted to splash down off the coast of Pensacola, Florida in the Gulf of Mexico tomorrow at 11:48 a.m. Pacific time, followed by the crew getting picked up at sea by one of SpaceX's recovery vessels.
Now, the mission began about 2 months ago on May 30th from historic Launch Pad 39A at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida. And after a successful separation from the Falcon 9, Bob and Doug enjoyed a 19-hour flight on board Dragon before they came to the International Space Station. Now, since arriving, Bob and Doug have been doing some real work aboard the station. In fact, Bob and Station Commander Chris Cassidy completed several spacewalks, and they've also been taking some really spectacular photos of planet Earth and the Dragon spacecraft as it's been in attached operations. We'll have a chance to share some of those later on in the broadcast.
And I can't believe it, but it's already been 63 days since they arrived in space, so they are just entering the final phase of their mission in just a few hours from now and have been preparing for over the last 2 weeks for their return flight. Today on board the space station is the Expedition 63 crew, led by NASA's Chris Cassidy and joined by Russian cosmonauts Anatoly Ivanishin and Ivan Wagner, and of course, Bob Behnken and Doug Hurley.
Now, while all the crew have been busy aboard, the ground teams have also been performing a number of checkouts in preparation for departure today. These checkouts have been going on over the last several days, and in fact, last week. They've included inspections of the heat shield, checkouts of the suits, some checkouts of the comm systems, as well as a number of activation procedures on the life support system on the vehicle, and cargo loading, which has been really cool. Actually, why don't we check in with Gary at Johnson Space Center? He can let us know how the station crew have been preparing and what we can expect from here. Gary?
Thank you, Shiva and Leah, and welcome inside the International Space Station Flight Control Room. Since arriving at the space station, Bob and Doug jumped right in as fully fledged members of Expedition 63. Over the last 2 months, they've helped execute more than 24 scientific investigations from every major category of research aboard the station, including studies in biology and biotechnology, earth and space sciences, human research, physical sciences, and technology demonstration. They've also had plenty of non-science-related work on their timelines, performing maintenance on life support and vehicle hardware in multiple modules and transferring cargo in and out of the attached HTV-9 cargo spacecraft. Bob Behnken also executed 4 spacewalks with Station Commander Chris Cassidy, wrapping up one of the final phases of upgrading the station's large external batteries, with Doug assisting in all suit and robotic operations. Since completing the spacewalks, Bob and Doug have spent the last 2 weeks preparing to come home. They received some additional on-orbit training to refresh them on the departure, re-entry, and splashdown procedures, and have been busy packing cargo for their return. In fact, that's what they're doing right now. there will be approximately 150 kilograms or 330 pounds of cargo returning on Dragon. The majority of that is more than 200 pounds of science, largely made up of samples packed away into powered cold freezers. These samples are from a range of biological research experiments on the station dedicated to improving our understanding of how the human body adapts to microgravity or looking at ways to use space to improve life back here on Earth. Now, let's go through some of the major upcoming milestones for today's departure coming up soon at just around 2:35 p.m. Pacific. We're currently awaiting Bob and Doug to ingress or board the station, or board the Dragon for their return flight home. They're doing a little bit of closeout duties now, but that'll be one of the first items on their agenda today. So less than 30 minutes from now, they'll be closing Dragon's hatch around 2:45 p.m. Pacific time. Once inside the vehicle, Bob and Doug will don their SpaceX spacesuits, which will be worn during all dynamic phases of the flight. All those same leak checks on the spacecraft would occur before the crew makes their way into the seats and straps in for undocking. Once the Dragon's hatch is closed, Chris Cassidy will affix a docking target to the outside of the A-Pass hatch and then close it about 10 minutes later, 2:55 p.m. Pacific, creating a space between the Dragon and station known as the vestibule. He then has one more hatch to close. That's the Node 2 forward hatch. Now, after all of those hatches are closed, about 15 minutes later, a ground command will be sent to open the valves on the Dragon side and begin depressurization. That's at 3:10 p.m. Pacific, essentially venting air inside and bringing that space down close to vacuum. They have to pause for 5 psi for a few minutes, allowing the temperature inside that vestibule to stabilize, perform a good leak check, and then continue depressurization. 4:20 p.m. Central Time, they'll conduct a go, no-go poll. That'll be the NASA teams here in Mission Control Houston and SpaceX teams in Hawthorne. If all is go, the undocking sequence begins. The undocking command will be sent, followed by a few minutes for the umbilical that connects the power and data between the two spacecraft to detach. 12 hooks will retract, and then 2 firings of Dragon's thrusters will initiate, and the undocking will be complete. That separation scheduled for 4:34 p.m. Pacific time. Now, the departure burn, there's 4 departure burns. Immediately after those 2 burns, they'll actually have that physical separation, and the departure burns will take them around the zenith side of the International Space Station. Those departure burns taking place, there's 4 of them, and will be taking place over the first few hours of their flight, essentially getting that Dragon further away from the International Space Station. Now, overnight, the crew will be able to get a sleep period in. In fact, this orbital trajectory gives them plenty of time to allow for the crew's sleep, to get them in a good circadian rhythm, and allow them to perform all of their tasks prior to splashdown. Including, while they are asleep, they're going to also be performing a phase burn. Right now, they're in the orbital plane of the International Space Station, but that phase burn will align them with their primary landing site. Right now, we're looking go for Pensacola, just off the coast of Pensacola, Florida. They'll perform a series of checks right upon waking up when that phase burn occurs while they are asleep. Those checks, they'll put on their suits and get ready for the deorbit sequence. The deorbit sequence is, there's a few steps there. First, there's going to be the preparation for the claw separation. There's the Dragon's trunk. They're going to perform a heavy yaw of the Dragon vehicle and release the Dragon trunk off to the side so it doesn't intersect with the vehicle during the deorbit sequence. Align Dragon back up with the orbital plane and fire the forward bulkhead Dracos. This will be one of the longest burns, and that is the deorbit burn, almost more than actually 11 minutes long. And that will slow them down enough. They'll position Dragon for re-entry into Earth's atmosphere, and then the re-entry sequence will begin. Of course, before they do that, they do have to close the nose cone. So after they close the nose cone, they'll go through the atmosphere, shoot the drogue parachutes, main parachutes, and then splash down. That's scheduled for tomorrow afternoon, Sunday afternoon, around 1:48 p.m. Central Time, 11:48 a.m. Pacific time. Then the recovery operations begin. After that, Bob and Doug will be back on planet Earth. Now, Station Commander Chris Cassidy will be watching the undocking and departure burn from the cupola, but the prime monitoring role falls to Bob and Doug. Flight controllers in Mission Control Houston will be backing them up. Now, as you've heard several times, Dragon's flight is intended to be
SpaceX
autonomous,
Dragon,
but the crew on board has the ability to take control and maneuver Dragon during the departure if necessary. On the station side, we're looking good. Solar arrays are locked in place. We have good communication links, and all station systems are looking healthy. Attitude will remain on U.S. control until the time of undocking, when we'll switch to control moment gyros only. We're tracking no issues for an on-time departure here in Mission Control Houston. Now back to Shiva and Leah in Hawthorne.
Good copy. And finally,
So right now on your screen is a view of mission control. That's actually where the ground controllers are all operating. Actually, why don't we listen into the nets for a second? I think there's some chatter happening there.
Copy. Thanks. We're going to start 2.103, assuming we have a go.
You are go.
I believe I just heard a go call on the FD net, but I think we're still in the process of assessing vehicle health and actually making sure that Bob and Doug can ingress the capsule, which should be underway currently.
So guys, right now
So with Dragon's ingress operations now underway, we're about 10 minutes to hatch closure and about 2 hours until Dragon departs the International Space Station at 4:34 p.m. Pacific time. So next up for Bob and Doug, they need to get in their spacesuits.
Yeah, and actually the suit's primary function is to protect the crew in the case of a cabin depressurization. If that were to occur, then the suits actually inflate with either a combination of nitrogen and oxygen, or oxygen depending on the pressure in the cabin. And they give them a habitable environment long enough to get home safely in an emergency scenario. The external portion of the suit is also flame retardant as well, so if there were a fire on board the vehicle, the suits would help provide the crew some protection in that event. The suits are actually really cool. They're very aesthetically designed and actually designed in-house here at SpaceX.
Yeah, they're definitely very sleek. The crew has actually been really busy all day as they have been preparing to leave. Got up this morning. It's actually evening on the International Space Station right now. And they got up and
guys,
started
I
working
want to
out.
tell you,
All
you
the
must be
astronauts on the space
wondering
station
one
have to work
thing,
out
like
for 2
why
hours a
aren't they
day, every day, to make sure
wearing
that they
space
keep up
suits
their
right now?
bone strength and their muscle
So
strength,
guys,
so that
I
way
don't
they,
think so
can
they will
walk
be
when they
wearing
get back
anytime
home.
soon,
And so
because
they got up, spot the
they are
opportunity
not
to do that,
preparing for re-entry right
hop
now.
and
They are
transfer
just
some emergency
be
equipment from
hovering
Dragon into
in
the space
space
station. They
only,
keep
and
that
in
emergency
space
equipment in there
they can
just in
remove
case they ever needed to make a quick
you can say
speedy
the
getaway in
craft,
Dragon, or take a
the
safe haven in
space
that
suit, if
space in
I'm
case
not
something
wrong,
were to happen
because
on the
if they
International
had, they
Space
would
Station.
have
Yeah, and
in
Leah, you mentioned the
that
idea of safe
already,
havening.
because
Actually,
we are
a
on
couple of
around
the
8
visiting
minutes from the
vehicles,
hatch
either
closer.
the Soyuz vehicle
So
and the Dragon
yeah,
vehicle, when they're attached
that's
to
the
the
thing.
space
But we
station,
we
can
have
provide the
2 hour
crew
window for
with
the
a
undocking.
place
Maybe
to
they will wear the
hole up
spacesuit
if there were an
inside
emergency on the
the
station, or if
spacecraft.
there was
Let's
a
just
leak
see
or
about
a
it. But
fire
my
or
speculation
depressurization
is
event. And so some of
that
that
only
emergency
which I
equipment
told
is
you.
stored in the vehicle for quick access in case they needed to get inside very quickly. And the crew actually train pretty rigorously on those emergency scenarios, getting in quickly under all kinds of visibility scenarios and checking that their crewmates are safely aboard in their vehicles as well. We had a chance to do some training with the crew actually here in Hawthorne earlier for the Crew 1 crew earlier this month. So. And just a quick recap of kind of what's coming up next. So Bob and Doug going through the ingress operations right now. Coming up, planned about 2:35 p.m. Pacific time is hatch closure. So that's where we will close the forward hatch on the Dragon spacecraft. And then following that will be closure of the APAS hatch.
And after we close the APAS hatch there, that's on the space station side. We'll have the space station crew be working on that. We'll go for vestibule depressurization, and the vestibule is that space in between the hatches that the crew flies through when they arrive, and then of course when they leave. But we are going to bring that space, which is at the same pressurization as the rest of the space station, down to as close to a vacuum as possible, because that's what it will be exposed to once Crew Dragon departs, hopefully in just a couple of hours.
Yeah, right now the planned departure and separation is looking like around 4:34 or 4:35 p.m. Pacific time. And that's when we're hoping to see Dragon do some small undocking burns that will separate it from the space station. On your screen is actually a view from inside the space station, looking down node 2 towards the pressurized mating adapter. I think I saw Chris Cassidy in the view there, and I think those are his other expedition crewmates on board.
Yes.
And Bob and Doug probably inside the capsule at this point.
Yes, that looks to be Chris Cassidy over on the left, and then Anatoly Ivanishin and Yvonne Wagner
SpaceX Endeavour,
upside down, or what
YO
feels like
configured
upside down to
at,
us, but really, there's no up or
21:30.
down in space.
Exactly, guys. So guys, they bought.
Both the hatches still
I
open,
just
so
want to
we'll be
tell you
waiting for
one
that
thing in
hatch closure.
space. How do
and
they
actually, you can
see
the
like
probably the has
which
hatch.
side is
If you
up
look
and which
just
side is
past
down?
where
Because
all
there
the
is no
ISS
up
crew
and
are, I
down.
believe that's
So
the has
whatever
hatch that's
you
sort of
can say
coming up
this
behind
ISS
that
20 is
white
written, right?
circle.
Whatever
Chris
you can
Cassidy will
say
actually have
the
some tasks to attach
mainly
a
they
docking
see
target
their
onto that when they're
orientation
ready to close the
from
ATAS
the
hatch.
text and also from the
You might
lighting.
be
The
helping
lighting is
Dragon
placed
to allow
above head.
disembark
So yeah, that's
inside
one
the capsule for
interesting
securing.
thing.
Now, we mentioned earlier today, Bob and Doug have been busy today. They've actually been busy as well stowing cargo on board the vehicle. Just listening into the nets right now, it looks like they're actually going through life support activation. So I just heard a call out that carbon dioxide levels are coming down, which means that our life support system is actively taking in air from the cabin and revitalizing it so Bob and Doug can breathe nicely on board.
So just some statistics while we're thinking about it. Obviously, we mentioned that Crew Dragon has been on board the station for 63 days now. Feels like yesterday. And during that time, Bob and Doug have traveled over 27 million statute miles around the Earth. So
That's incredible.
frequent flyers, I would say.
Yeah. Do you get is there a frequent flyer pass for Dragon? I hope so. Yeah, they're zipping around. I think on ground track they're going about 17,500 kilometers when they're at altitude. If,
Yeah.
that
The
sounds
view
about right.
is kind of
I think
funny
17,500
sometimes, but it is
miles.
very,
Wow.
very normal
So
in the space station.
It's still extremely fast.
Exactly, guys. 17,500 miles per hour is not a joke. It is around
So
20.
if you look just above the hatch, you see that ISS 20 flag. That is representing the 20th anniversary of the International Space Station, which we
Okay.
will actually be celebrating later this year. So for the past 20 years, I like to explain it to people as if you are under 20 years of age, you've never lived a day without humans in space. So for the past 20 years, we've had continuous human presence aboard the International Space Station. It's truly international. We have obviously our two upside down friends we see. They're getting a better look inside by turning in that direction. They are from Roscosmos, the Russian space agency. Looks like they are taking out the intermodule ventilation. That helps equalize the air in between Dragon's capsule and the rest of the International Space Station.
Yeah, that's right. Actually, while Dragon has been attached to the space station, most of its operations have been in what we call quiescent mode. So that's really just a low power state where we've only got monitoring on the thermal system, the propellant system, taking a look at some parameters in case we were to see anything that would trigger the Dragon's onboard automation to wake the vehicle up and let ground operators know something needs to be addressed. The onboard life support system is actually only used when we close the hatches and for brief periods when we are configuring the vehicle when we first arrive and periods when we're leaving, like right now. So that duct that they pull out, the intermodule ventilation duct, that actually provides clean, breathable air and circulates the air in the capsules. And providing that air from the International Space Station.
And it looks like hatch closure is soon to be underway.
Houston and Hawthorne from Endeavour.
Still
We're
working to
closing the
take out
forward
some
hatch.
equipment inside Dragon, move it back into the space station.
Yeah, so as part of those activities, moving the intermodule ventilation duct, they activated, of course, the lithium hydroxide scrubbers on board Dragon. Cap and fan has been running. And I think we're just waiting on confirmation of hatch closure.
Yes, and I think they just called down that they are working on that, putting that into motion. We're getting one step closer to sending Bob and Doug home.
Closed for Endeavour.
SpaceX copies.
And Houston copies.
And we just got confirmation that capsule Endeavour has closed the forward hatch. We can actually see on our screen the activities to close the APAS hatch as well.
Guys,
And that Crew Dragon hatch closure came at
Yes.
2:36 p.m. Pacific time as the International Space Station was flying over the North Atlantic Ocean.
we still have some time for the main thing to
As
close.
part of hatch closure operations, Bob and
Around.
Doug actually inspected the seal on the interior surface of the forward hatch on Dragon. And we're talking about the forward hatch and the side hatch. The forward hatch is actually the part that's attached to the front, sort of the front portion of the International Space Station.
Exactly.
So if you imagine the International Space Station flying in a direction around the Earth, the forward direction of it is what we're attached to. And that, if you were imagining the capsule sitting on the rocket, is actually at the very top of the rocket underneath the nose cone. So if you're imagining the rocket as it was on the launch pad, it's a little bit sideways right now.
And guys, it is 8
And there's a
minutes.
sealing surface on that forward hatch that Bob and Doug would have done an inspection on, just to make sure that there's no foreign object debris or FOD that could cause a potential leak.
We have 8 minutes from the hatch closure of the space station, guys.
And looks like we may be stepping into a satellite handover. It happens commonly on the International Space Station, and it's called actually a TDRS handover, Tracking Data and Relay Satellite System. We're constantly moving from one to the next.
Exactly. So guys, right now the Endeavour, means the driving spacecraft, has its hatch closed.
Yeah, so we actually use those tracking and data relay satellites as well on the Dragon vehicle. They provide our telemetry links. I believe they're in the GeoBelt. Hopefully that's correct.
They should
But
be.
they provide communications, uplink and downlink and commanding, actually, a downlink for us to command the vehicle as well if we need to step in on the ground side. Speaking of which, we actually have a view of mission controls in Hawthorne. So that is that's where our mission controllers are in Hawthorne. The folks who are issuing commands to the Dragon spacecraft are all sitting. In the third row there is the mission director, as well as, and here's an internal view of the Dragon spacecraft. We've got Bob in his, looks like his comfort garment, which would be what he wears underneath his suit. Nice to see the capsule getting all packed up.
And then another view from the International Space Station side of things. Looks like Anatoly Ivanishin flying out of view, and Chris Cassidy down there in between the hatches in that vestibule area. He is working through procedures to soon be closing the APAS hatch on the space station side and prepare for depressurization.
Guys, this depressure.
Dragon SpaceX, no response.
Yeah, and so we
required.
talked about this a little bit.
External on cameras for your suit donning.
Copy, SpaceX. Thank you.
Now, we talked about this a little bit earlier, but the vestibule, the space between the APAS hatch and the forward hatch on Dragon is really just a small volume that is normally exposed to the vacuum of space when we don't have a visiting vehicle like the Dragon spacecraft. And we have to step through some depressurization steps once we have confirmed that all of those hatches are secured, both on the International Space Station side as well as on the Dragon side of the spacecraft.
Yes.
So we just heard the call that Bob and Doug are go for suit donning. So the Dragon hatch is
Okay.
closed. They've said farewell to their orbiting
So
friends
there
for
will
now,
be
till they're all
suit. They
reunited
will
and
be
grounded in the
wearing the
future.
suits. Okay.
And they'll be going through that suit donning shortly. You did mention it looked like Bob Behnken was already in his comfort garment, that first layer of the suit.
Yeah, the comfort garment is it's basically like an athletic garment. Just helps them stay comfortable before they step into the suit. And the suit is largely a one-piece design. So the helmet is integrated into it. The boots are integrated into it. Really, they will unzip some interfaces on the suit, climb into it, zip all those attachment points up, and then there's actually an umbilical on the leg of the suit, so it's a kind of a connection that provides gases and electrical connections to the suit, so they can use the integrated microphones in their helmets, and it also provides them breathable gases for suit leak checks, and if we were to have one of those emergency scenarios, it would also provide pressurization to the suit. And I think notable to mention that these are different suits from what you might imagine for like the spacewalks and EVA suits. These are what are called intravehicular activity suits, meant for really activity inside the vehicle.
So what we just saw as Chris Cassidy was down there in between the hatches in that vestibule space, he was affixing that docking target that we mentioned earlier. I like to say it's like an X marks the spot because that's what the vehicles aim for when they arrive at the International Space Station. So one step closer to bring in Bob and Doug home.
Okay.
And we're actually really fortunate that the weather has turned out pretty good in the Gulf. Looking at a Pensacola landing site right now, we just, before we went on air today, we had the 2.5 hour prior to undocking weather briefing, and things are still looking good for an on-time departure today.
Okay.
Yeah, really glad to see the weather cleared up. Storm moved back towards the Atlantic.
So that's a good news for us. And
Which opens up our opportunities for landing sites in the Gulf of Mexico.
so guys,
Which Gary had actually mentioned earlier, Pensacola being the primary site today.
Yeah, so as they continue work on the A-Pass hatch, let's check in with Gary over on the International Space Station Mission Control Room side of things.
Thank you, Leah. We're watching the same view that you are seeing, Chris Cassidy working on that A-Pass hatch on the International Space Station side. As you saw, that hatch on the Dragon side closed. Now, this is an important set of procedures that Cassidy is working right now. You already mentioned the docking target. This is that rod with the X at the end of it. X marks the spot. As Leah mentioned, this is an important item to affix to that A-Pass hatch. Now, you see he set up a camera just outside of there, and he's also going to be taking some pictures for the ground teams to know exactly how the A-Pass was configured prior to closing, getting ready for some of those next crews. Now, you saw there was a white padding on the outside of it too. That's just for a safety measure as the crew was moving in between the hatches, but everything going according to plan here. That A-Pass hatch expected to be closed about 10 minutes after closing the Dragon hatch, which was closed just about 10 minutes ago. So it should be closing very soon. The crew already just a little bit ahead of that timeline. So a few items coming up after that A-Pass hatch closure. Now you see that hatch is on the station side. There's going to be a space in between the Dragon hatch and the International Space Station hatch. That space is called the vestibule. So about 15 minutes after they close that A-Pass hatch, they'll give a go for depressurization of that vestibule. That is all controlled from the Dragon side. But we'll be watching very closely here in Mission Control Houston. Now, the depressurization of that vestibule does take quite a little bit of time. It takes about an hour, actually, to get down to vacuum, but there's going to be a check at about 5 pounds per square inch. The check at 5 pounds per square inch is going to take some time. It won't take too long to actually get to 5 psi, but once they actually get there, bringing that vestibule down to vacuum creates a little bit of temperature swings. So we need that to dampen out a bit before performing a reliable leak check. That leak check will happen at the 5 psi mark, and then we'll continue down closer to depressurization towards vacuum. Now, that's all coming up very soon. The go, no go for actual undocking to occur a little bit more than an hour after depressurization, that at about 4:20 p.m. Pacific. And if everything goes according to plan, so far the crew a little bit ahead of schedule. We'll get them undocked right on time. We're looking at 4:34 and 58 seconds p.m. Pacific time. Everything going great so far from the International Space Station side. Now back over to you in Hawthorne.
Thanks, Gary. Now that Dragon's hatch is closed and Bob and Doug have donned their suits, we'll be looking for the APAS hatch on the station side to close very shortly. APAS is an acronym that stands for Androgynous Peripheral Attachment System. So you can see why we use an acronym, and it's an integral part of the docking system. Before closing it, we saw Chris Cassidy working to attach that docking target to fine-tune any alignment for the approaching spacecraft. So it's not something required for the undocking, but obviously we need it to be there for the next spacecraft that arrives at that port.
Yeah, and Gary had actually given us a...
Anna, I got you loud and clear. Good to talk to you again today. How's everything going?
Things are great. I'm super excited to be here.
This is so cool to hear them from the space station, right? And the depressurization, if you must be wondering this depressurization, if I am not wrong,
So I think what we heard there was a comm check between the core
will be done for the hatch itself, means the volume where the astronauts is right now. That means the Chris Cassidy is right now inside that volume will be depressurized, if I am not wrong, because they can't depressurize the ISS, they can't depressurize the spacecraft itself, so that is the only volume which is left, right?
Kind of what we were talking
So,
about earlier.
yeah.
Once we get through suit donning, which will have a couple of steps involved in it, first with these comm checks, and then we'll actually do some pressure checks to make sure that the suits are leak tight. Once we get through that, then we'll actually go through a quick poll. Mission control teams will verify that we're go to depressurize the vestibule, again, which is that space in between Dragon's forward hatch and the station's APAS hatch on the mating adapter, pressurized mating adapter on the forward module.
And as you saw, some flashes in that area down in the vestibule. That's Chris Cassidy, commander of the International Space Station, down in that space. He's taking pictures, and he'll be sending those back down to the ground team so that they can check out how the hatch closure procedure went, and he'll be able to provide those detailed photos for future use as well.
Yeah, vehicle actually undergoing a number of reconfiguration steps at this point. With crew, of course, on board, we have to make sure that our life support systems and thermal systems are all operating as nominal. And the volume actually in between in the vestibule, that pressurized area, which is now at about 14.7 psi, will actually vent that through the some vent valves on the Dragon side of the system.
So one of the two astronauts returning to Earth in Crew Dragon is Doug Hurley, the spacecraft commander for the Demo 2 mission. He previously flew on 2 space shuttle missions as the pilot on STS-127 and again on STS-135, which was the final space shuttle flight. Here's a closer look at NASA astronaut Doug Hurley.
Excited?
Very excited. Yeah, very excited.
You feel ready? Still pumped?
Oh yeah, I think we're ready. I think we're certainly ready.
Joining the SpaceX Demo 2 test. He is a Marine Corps colonel and test pilot. He was selected as an astronaut in 2000. He piloted Space Shuttle Endeavour and Atlantis for STS-135, the final space shuttle mission. Introducing NASA astronaut Doug Hurley.
It's a life-changing process in so many ways to fly into space. It's just overwhelming in some respects. Just the sensations, the rumbling, the shaking, the acceleration. When the engines shut off and you go from, in the case of the shuttle, you go from 3 Gs to 0 Gs instantaneously, and things start floating. And I remember distinctly just thinking, what just happened? To see a rocket launch in person, is it's a pretty emotional event. I remember the first time I saw a shuttle launch, and it was amazing. And then when I saw a shuttle launch with my wife on it, that is quite the emotional experience. My name is Doug Hurley, and I'm the spacecraft commander for the Demo 2 mission to the International Space Station. We are doing the first crewed flight for NASA and for SpaceX. So this is the test flight to prove end-to-end from launch to docking to ISS operations and then entry, descent, and landing. We'll wake up about 6 hours prior to launch. You'll eat breakfast, you'll do a medical check, you'll start to get your comfort garments on, you'll get a weather brief, and then you'll go get suited up. And it's the same suit-up room that astronauts have been using since Apollo.
And there they are, NASA astronauts.
And then we'll walk out, jump in our Teslas, and we'll ride to the pad. We will board the vehicle roughly 3 hours before launch, go through all those pre-flight checks, and then ideally we're off to the races from there at launch.
Ignition, liftoff of the Falcon 9 and Crew Dragon. Go NASA, go SpaceX, Godspeed, Bob and Doug.
It's about a 9 to 10 minute ride to orbit. We'll go through the on-orbit activities. We'll do some manual flying of the vehicle. We'll obviously sleep on the vehicle. And then we will continue through the rendezvous phase to where we end up in front of the space station the next morning, ready to dock.
Endeavour, this is Houston. Bob and Doug, welcome to the International Space Station.
We'll spend likely a few months on space station. We'll be able to do some on-board training with regard to undocking, entry, descent, and landing. Actually getting to fly the mission with Bob, we've been close friends for almost 20 years, so, the whole experience for me is what we're looking for.
For Doug personally, he's worked so hard, through his entire life to get to where we are right now. It makes me so happy to see that he gets to be part of this mission, the spacecraft commander. I'm just glad to see his hard work and his dreams come true for that. We're so proud of him.
It's been a huge amount of sacrifice and time away from home, but the fruits of our labor are coming to fruition.
Now, with Doug is NASA astronaut Bob Behnken. He's the Joint Operations Commander for Demo 2. He previously flew on 2 shuttle missions, STS-123 and 130, and he also served a tour as the Chief of the Astronaut Office. Why don't we learn a little bit more about him?
When you go through the launch day preparations, there's a lot of moments that kind of stand out to you. One is the kind of the celebratory piece of it, which is that you're walking out of the suit-up room and getting in the vehicle that's going to take you to the launch pad. When you close the hatch, that's really when Doug and I are in the vehicle, and it's our vehicle, and we're really in control of the mission at that point.
Test pilots, their task
SpaceX Dragon on the big
that
loop.
man could fly into orbit around the Earth
when you are,
and return live and well to talk about it.
Section 1.4.0.
There's always a balance of managing risk as you go forward to execute a test point and figuring out a way to collect the data. We hear a sound. Okay, is that sound an expected sound? Or we see a light? Is that light an expected light? What's the source of it? Does it sync up with something else that's going on or not? So trying to dissect all of that in real time in your head is, a lot of things happen like that on launching of a vehicle.
From St. Anne, Missouri, he is an Air Force colonel and flight test engineer. He flew aboard Space Shuttle Endeavour twice. Introducing NASA astronaut Bob Behnken.
My career at NASA has kind of spanned a couple of decades at this point. I arrived with the class of 2000, went through the training program, primarily focused on the space shuttle and the International Space Station, learning those systems. Having launched a couple times on vehicles, the The second time was definitely different than the first time. You can feel a little bit guilty of, hey, should I study one more thing, or is there one more piece of information I should get? Am I really prepared or not? So that's definitely different between where I was on my first flight and where I'm at right now.
I think for me personally, as a spouse, watching everything that Bob has put into this over the last 5 years, the dedication that he's shown, the perseverance is pretty special. For both of us, though, the way our minds work, it won't be until sort of the mission is complete that you have really a chance to savor it and celebrate it.
On a deeply personal level, I'm really excited that my son is get a chance to see me launch into space. Being an astronaut has been a little bit of an abstraction thing for him because he's seen me do it in old videos, but he hasn't seen me do it for real. And so I'm excited for him to see me launch into space. Really, my role on the Demo 2 mission is to make sure that we get this vehicle tested and evaluated so that we can move on to more operational missions at the International Space Station.
3, 2, 1, 0. Ignition. Liftoff of the Falcon 9 and Crew Dragon. Go NASA, go SpaceX. Godspeed, Bob and Doug.
We've got a lot of objectives on board the vehicle that we need to accomplish to really make sure that it's good to go. We'll do everything from actually talk from the Dragon vehicle to a Russian Soyuz. We'll dig out all kinds of hardware that's stowed in the nooks and crannies of the vehicle so that we have a good feel for how things are in place and getting them back in place. We plan to do all those things as just a part of our test mission.
Welcome to Bob and Doug. I will tell you, the whole world saw this mission, and we are so, so proud.
I'm looking forward to that moment when he enjoys the accomplishment, when he realizes we did this. We did a great job. We accomplished what we set out to do. Whenever he lets himself feel that and experience that success, that's what I'm really looking forward to for him. For me, I'm looking forward to when he touches down at Ellington and the NASA plane that brings him home again at the end of it.
I think that the thing I'm most looking forward to is actually ending up in the water safely at the end of the mission. I'm expecting a little bit of vomiting maybe to happen in the end game. So when we get to that opportunity to do that, I'm looking for that kind of celebratory event for both of us in the water at the end of the mission.
So cool, great view on your screen. That's from a camera behind Bob and Doug. Bob sitting in the right hand as we see him.
Dragon in 2.5, 2 successful leak checks.
Dragon SpaceX, we see the same. Thank you.
So there's confirmation of a couple of great milestones. Forward hatch is closed, suit donning is complete. We just completed suit leak checks. Everything nominal. Bob and Doug just raising their visors, get a little bit more comfortable.
I love this view because it makes me feel like I'm in the back seat of Crew Dragon, just going along for the ride. We did have, as you mentioned, a pass hatch closure during that brief video, as well as the beginning of suit leak checks. I've got a few milestones coming up. Next, we'll be looking for that vestibule depressurization, bringing that space down to a vacuum. That should be happening very shortly. Hopefully within the next 5 minutes, actually.
Yeah, so again, on your screen, left-hand side is Spacecraft Commander Doug Hurley. Right-hand side is Spacecraft Pilot Bob Behnken, and also Joint Operations Commander. In front of them are the 3 touchscreen displays in the Dragon spacecraft. And with suit leak checks complete, the next major milestone, as you mentioned, Leah, is vestibule depressurization.
So you can see they're checking out all their screens. The crew will actually be monitoring during the departure portion of the flight. On the way up, they had a couple of opportunities to perform some manual flight tests by piloting the vehicle and checking those out and seeing how it would fly if you ever had to. But fortunately, it is an autonomous vehicle. So the goal is that the astronauts are along for the ride, there to monitor and there to step in case anything were to go wrong. But it should be an autonomous flight home. We're not stopping for any of those flight tests along the way.
That's right. Just trying to take a look here to see what the vestibule is currently pressurized at. Taking a look at the data, it's about 14.1 psi, so pounds per square inch. For reference, at sea level on Earth, we're at about 14.7 psi, and if you're about 1,000 feet above sea level, then you're actually at about 14.1. Just happened to look that up earlier today. It looks like we might have lost the camera feed, might be another handover.
Probably so. We are waiting for that vestibule depressurization to begin. We're getting calls from the crew that they're getting ready for that. So things are moving along smoothly. Everything is happening on time for an on-time departure from the International Space Station today.
Yeah, and that call will actually be the ground side. We'll do a couple of checks, make sure that we're go and all of the data and telemetry on the Dragon side of the vehicle looks good and on the vestibule sensors look good. Then there should be a call to the crew from the core letting them know that that we're planning to step into commanding vestibule depressurization. And then we'll actually issue that command. For this command, we are in joint operations. So what that means is the flight director in Hawthorne, or in Houston at Johnson Space Center, the flight director of the International Space Station has mission authority for the mission. And any commands that we want to issue to the spacecraft will actually have to get permission from the flight director. And so some of those calls will be happening in the background before we actually begin that depressurization.
Dragon SpaceX for status.
Go ahead, Anna.
The ground has verified system reconfigurations for hatch closure are complete and they are nominal. The ground will step into vestibule depressurization shortly. And finally, control of cabin air temperature via your procedure 4.080 is allowed at this point, and note that the hex is currently configured for maximum cooling.
Okay, copy all, 4.080 if we need to change the temperature. Appreciate it.
And some words going up to the Crew Dragon crew from, as you mentioned, the core, the crew operations responsible engineer here on the ground at SpaceX. They spoke with the teams in Mission Control Houston and decided, yes, they are almost ready to begin that depressurization of the vestibule. This is the exact opposite procedure that we saw on the way up. And sounds like vestibule depressurization has begun.
Okay, so guys, yeah. The interesting fact is that the JavaScript is used. So JavaScript, the coding geeks, JavaScript.
So as we mentioned, working to bring that space down to a vacuum in preparation for Dragon to depart today. That depressurization.
But yeah, that's the thing.
3:04 p.m. Pacific.
And moving pretty quickly, data shows we're currently at about 12 psi in the vestibule. Just dropped below 12, and only less than a minute ago we were at 14.1. And should only take 5 to 10 minutes to drop down to that 5 psi holding point that Gary had mentioned earlier.
And that hold will be for 25 minutes while the teams make sure the depressurization is due to the actual removal of the pressurized atmosphere and not a change in the temperature inside Crew Dragon.
Yeah, a little bit of physics there. If you expand a gas, which is what's happening here, we're taking the gas in the vestibule and venting it away, and so taking the molecules in that vestibule and sort of expanding them out, the temperature tends to drop, and so we'll want to wait for that temperature to equalize, because as it warms up, the remaining gas will bump up a little bit in pressure, and that can look like a false leak from either the International Space Station side or the Dragon side. So we give it some time to equalize the temperatures, and once we feel confident that the pressure is stable in the vestibule, then we actually perform the leak check and look to see that we don't have a drop in cabin pressure on the Dragon side, as well as a rise in pressure in the vestibule.
Okay. And things are moving quickly. We are actually already at 8.5 PSI, it's pounds per square inch, in the vestibule. And as you mentioned just a moment ago, we were at 14.1. So at 8.2 now, and then we'll be waiting for that 5 PSI point where we'll do that 25-minute hold.
That's an interesting info which we got.
Yeah, and kind of wild to think, among the other fun facts I was looking up, so the pressure at Everest is about 4 PSI. So that'll kind of give you a sense of this. The pressure in the vestibule right now would be about similar to you being at maybe like 12,000 or 13,000 feet.
Yeah, and very interesting. That's near the same pressure as in an EMU, or an extravehicular mobility unit, that the astronauts use when they go outside on a spacewalk. They keep that at 4.3 PSI. That way they are more able to easily move their fingers and their joints, so that work outside isn't as difficult.
Now, something interesting to note on the extravehicular, or on the EMUs. So at that like roughly 4 PSI, where you're not breathing the same mix of air that you would be breathing here on the ground. Here on Earth, we'd be breathing something like 70% nitrogen and then about 20-something% oxygen. You actually need the concentration of oxygen to be higher. So when you go to those lower pressures, those suits actually transition to oxygen, right?
And taking a look at the data, it looks like we are at 5.9 PSI in the vestibule. So coming up pretty soon, we should be expecting that call of having reached that 5 PSI level that we're waiting for that 25-minute check.
Mission controllers that you can see on your screen, specifically who we refer to as the systems officer, will be monitoring for the pressure. We'll also be looking for temperature checks on that area. The systems officer is actually responsible for the life support systems and thermal system on the vehicle, and so they're most familiar with that telemetry and able to make those calls for nominal leak check complete. And they'd also be responsible for checking that the vehicle configures into appropriate transition modes.
And I just heard that the initial depressurization of the vestibule is complete, looking at 5 PSI, nearly on the dot.
So I think what we can expect next is a call from the core up to the crew to let them know that the thermal hold period is beginning. And then we will probably also hear when the leak check is complete and the results of that leak check.
Yeah, and we expect a nominal leak check also.
So we're kind of listening to the nets in the background. Just heard a conversation from the mission director prompting operators on next steps for start of this thermal hold period and then the leak checks. Bob and Doug really just sitting tight in the cabin at this point in their suits, able to monitor all this information from their 3 touchscreen displays in the vehicle.
Yeah, and we heard that we're about an hour and 20 minutes from the opening of the undocking window. So they get more than one chance today to undock. On the way up, we saw the astronauts really only had that single second that they had to launch so that they would line up perfectly with the International Space Station. It's a little bit different coming home. Those burns will really be what help us line up with our targeted landing site. Right now, looking at Pensacola and a scheduled splashdown tomorrow.
There's a view on your screen. Left-hand side is the International Space Station. So that's coming from Node 2, or the forward node. Looks like Commander Chris Cassidy taking a look down the PMA and sealing up the hatch. Probably checking the seal there, it looks like.
Yeah, probably checking it for FOD, or foreign object debris, making sure that there's nothing, even a minuscule hair, that could impair the hatches from getting a good solid seal. So it looks like another handover of our TEDRS satellite systems. Those are tracked. The flight controllers know when to expect those, and so they can target their communications with the crew and any of those operations around that as well.
And now would actually probably be a great time to kind of hear what the mission control team in Houston is doing and what's going on station side. Gary, can you give us an update?
I sure can, Shiva. We're seeing the same results of the vestibule depressurization. Went down pretty quick, but again, as you said, we're looking for that thermal stabilization before we perform the leak checks. We saw good leak checks from the crew's suit-up procedures. The suit's looking pretty good. And then we just saw Chris Cassidy aboard the International Space Station finishing out his closeout duties of the pressurized mating adapter. That was that long tube on the other side of the hatch that he just closed, putting some items there, getting ready for the next crew coming up later this year. He closed the APAS hatch and configured that for closure, and taking some closeout photos and checking for any foreign object debris, and then eventually closed that node 2 forward hatch. That'll complete Chris Cassidy's duties, really, aboard the International Space Station for today. The primary role of undocking monitoring actually goes to Bob and Doug, with Mission Control Houston flight controllers monitoring from the ground. Chris Cassidy will be able to go inside the cupola. The windows are, the shutters of the cupola windows are scheduled to be shut, but he'll be able to open them for situational awareness, take some good closeout photos of Dragon departing. Right now, we're just, again, in a holding period for that vestibule depressurization, holding rock steady at 5 pounds per square inch, 5 psi. That is the final step. That is the final step, final check, really, for vestibule depressurization until we get down closer to vacuum. Then, of course, we have the go, no-go for undocking coming up in just about an hour, and then eventually we'll get to separation, right now scheduled for just after 6:30 p.m. Central Time, 4:30 p.m. Pacific Time. Everything looking good from the International Space Station side of things. Again, Cassidy's duties really wrapped up for today, closing both of the station hatches. With that, we'll continue to monitor this thermal stabilization, ready to continue depressurization of the vestibule coming up here shortly. With that, we'll pass it back over to you in Hawthorne.
Thanks, Gary. Appreciate it. On your screen, a view from that camera, looking at Bob and Doug's console.
So when Dragon undocks today, it'll actually weigh over 27,000 pounds. We're looking at 27,600 pounds. Of course, in microgravity, that's nearly nothing. And they'll have about 3 days worth of food and snacks on board. So we're planning on them to get home tomorrow afternoon, well, tomorrow midday for us here on the Pacific coast. And so those 3 days of food and snacks are there just in case there were to be some weather crop up that wasn't expected, and they can remain in orbit for a couple of days after undocking and be perfectly fine.
Yeah, that's right. The supplies that they have on board are really there in case we had a wave-off scenario. So if we were to have some kind of weather come in or something happen to the spacecraft where ground teams would want more time to troubleshoot and understand and see if they could recover fault tolerance on the vehicle, that would give them time to do a couple more orbits and then try again at another opportunity. Right now, vehicle looking very healthy. It's been very healthy the entire time it's been attached to station. Actually, the entire period while we were attached to space station, we were doing weekly checkouts on the vehicle of the life support system, thermal system, power system, and the prop system on board. And spacecraft has been pretty solid the entire mission.
So while we are in this holding period right now of depressurization, we're holding at that 5 psi, 5 pounds per square inch to make sure that there is no difference in temperature that's really causing that to fluctuate. A look ahead at the undocking, we are expecting to see undocking last about 5.5 minutes. And during that time, undocking for Dragon looks a little bit different than for other vehicles. When the Soyuz is on the International Space Station, it undocks by using springs that push it away from the space station. And Dragon will instead use a couple of undock burns. So 2 small, short burns, about 1.5 seconds for one of them and 5 for the other, and those will just do just enough to bring Dragon away from the International Space Station so that it can conduct its departure burns later.
Yeah, Dragon actually has 16 Draco thrusters on the base of the spacecraft, 12 in what we call the service section of the spacecraft, and 4 that would be underneath the nose cone around that forward hatch. The nose cone Dracos, the forward bulkhead Dracos, as we like to call them, are actually disabled for this portion of the mission and will be disabled for the next 3 expected burns, which would be that undock 1 burn, undock 2 burn, and then what we refer to as departure 0, which gets us on a path out of the approach ellipsoid and the keep out sphere around the International Space Station. So these first 3 burns will actually only use the 12 service section Dracos. And we actually have that many because of redundancy on the vehicle. So we could lose certain combinations of those thrusters and still have full dimensionality control and the ability to control the vehicle's position applied thrust to it.
So if you're wondering what's keeping Dragon attached to the International Space Station right now, there are 2 sets of hooks, 6 on each side, so 12 hooks. And when that undocking sequence begins, the hooks will open and the umbilical, which provides power from the space station to Crew Dragon, that will detach, and then those short burns will fire and Crew Dragon will be on its way.
Yeah, those 12 hooks are actually what also provides the seal as well. So they ensure that the vestibule has that leak-tight seal. And on the way up, when we docked in late May, that was one of the major milestones after we had attached, verifying that the soft capture system had completely closed and that all those hooks had driven closed.
So as you can see, NASA astronaut and commander of the International Space Station, Chris Cassidy, he's staying behind on the International Space Station for right now, and he'll return to Earth aboard a Soyuz in October. But he has just closed the Node 2 hatch. So the APAS hatch was closed earlier by Cassidy. The Dragon hatch was closed, and now just even creating a more firm seal by closing that Node 2 hatch. And as you mentioned earlier, that's on the front end of the space station, if it really had a front side. So so that's where they are at. And you saw him taking some pictures, recording that process, and he'll be able to deliver those to the ground later for analysis and just to check out how everything went, this first departure for Crew Dragon with a crew.
Good view from the interior of Dragon. We're looking at the pilot side seat. So
and
that's
view
Bob
from
Behnken.
the window is looking so cool, right?
Doug Hurley's hands on just behind him.
Hey, Chris, that call came down on Space to Ground 1, so I'm just going to read back on the big loop that we confirm.
And if you actually look on the right-hand...
Node 2 forward hatch and the MPEV are closed. And Chris, I owe you shortly what the undock sequence time is.
Okay, the sun is rising on the ISS, as you can see, guys.
And that was a call to Chris Cassidy on the space station, checking out and making sure that they were just echoing that they saw that Node 2 forward hatch closure. Things progressing well for an on-time departure. When Doug and Bob got into the spacecraft today, they had a few housekeeping things to do. They wanted to make sure those footrests that you see right there are firmly attached for the ride home. And then you can see a window over to the right of your screen. Those have had some window covers on them. They removed both of those, but they are still available so that when the crew go to sleep later tonight, they'll be able to put those window covers back up. That'll keep them from seeing a sunrise every 45 minutes or a sunset, because the space station, as we mentioned, is orbiting Earth at 17,500 miles an hour. And so they see quite a few beautiful views, sunrises and sunsets every day, 16 to be exact.
Exactly.
Yeah, and you can actually kind of get a sense for how bright that might be. Spacecraft and the International Space Station are currently not in the Earth's shadow, so in sunlight, and you can see how bright the window can get, almost rivaling the lights in the cabin.
Exactly, guys. Actually...
Now that window is actually right next to the side hatch, so you can see there's a black strip next to that window. That's actually a handrest, a handhold, and next to that is the side hatch, and that's actually what Bob and Doug will be egressing out of after they do, after successful re-entry, parachute deployment, and splashdown.
Guys,
Yeah, so
that
that's what we saw the crew
the
climb
orbital
in.
period of
Once they
ISS is
crossed that
90
crew
minutes,
access arm, that
and
last place
hence
that they were on Earth
they
in that white room,
every
they climbed in through that
every
side
45
hatch, but
minutes
that's
they
not what's
experience
attached to the
sunset
International
and
Space
sunrise.
Station.
So
The
it's
nose
not like a
cone on the crew
24-hour
dragon
day
opens up,
for
and
them.
like you
It's like
said, exposes
45
some
minute
clusters underneath,
45-minute day
blisters
and
underneath,
45-minute
and
night,
they
and
actually
again
floated
that.
through
So
that
that's why
hatch. So
we have
they arrived
16
through that
times
one and departed through
sunrise
that
and
one. And once they
sunset
get back on Earth,
on
that side
ISS.
hatch is the primary egress or exit from the vehicle for Bob Behnken and Doug Hurley.
Yeah, and actually one of the steps right when Bob and Doug had entered the vehicle on the launch pad was to do a leak check of that hatch. Hatch remains sealed the entire time while we're in space, and really only gets opened once we're back safely on Earth.
So pretty noteworthy about this mission. There are a lot of firsts for this mission. It's our return to flight from American soil for the first time in 9 years, since the space shuttle program. And it's also going to be the first splashdown in over 45 years. So actually on July 24th, just a couple of weeks ago, that was the 45-year anniversary of the last Apollo capsule splashdown with the Apollo-Soyuz test project. So it's been a long time since we've seen a crew splashdown. That typically happens with a landing. Of course, the shuttle was an orbiter and could land like a plane. And then the Soyuz, which astronauts have been arriving in for the past 9 years, that lands on land in the steppes of Kazakhstan. So this one we're looking to land in the Gulf Coast. It means a much quicker ride home for Bob and Doug once they get back.
Yeah, once we get through the Earth's atmosphere, we'll have 2 drogue chutes deploy and then 4 main chutes deploy, and then splashdown currently targeted for Pensacola, so off the west coast of Florida. And recovery actually looks a little bit different than it did 45 years ago. So we have some pretty cool recovery boats, have helicopter pads on them, as well as a what we refer to as it's as an A-arm, but it's basically a crane on the back of the spacecraft. So, excuse me, on the back of the boat. And a couple of fast boat teams will go out to the capsule, verify that it's safe to approach. Then that boat will come up, scoop up the Dragon spacecraft, put it on the deck. They'll secure everything and then open up the hatches and help Bob and Doug egress on the recovery ship.
If you've ever seen any of that old Apollo footage, the astronauts actually used to get out in the water. And so a little bit different this time. The crew will be waiting until that boat arrives with that crane to lift them up onto the deck, and they'll get the chance to get out on the boat instead of on the seas.
So guys, right now we are just waiting.
Yeah, and actually for
undocking to happen.
Recovery, we have 7 potential recovery sites, what we refer to as supported landing sites. So those are areas where a recovery team can get there very quickly, recover the crew within a couple of hours of their splashdown, but usually actually much faster than that. So we've got 4 sites in the Gulf Coast on the west, or in the Gulf on the west coast of Florida, and then 3 sites on the east coast of Florida. One of them, of course, being Cape Canaveral.
So as we were watching this past week, this tropical storm become a hurricane, there was some concern about returning today because we do have some recovery criteria. Landing in the water is a lot more difficult than landing on land because you have to consider things like wave height and wind speed. And so we are looking at those spaces in the Gulf, and they're looking pretty good compared to obviously the spaces on the east side of Florida. But yes, we have to take into consideration what the helicopters can arrive in and what all the boats can withstand and what the vessel, the crew capsule itself can withstand.
Yeah, that's right. The hurricane Isaias moving up, I think, the east coast of Florida now, so hopefully folks are staying safe out there. I know Doug actually took some photos from the cupola of this hurricane as it's moving up the east coast. But luckily, no major impact to weather on the west coast. Good winds, no significant lightning, no significant rain is projected for the area. And I think importantly as well, the wave heights, which are important for the spacecraft, but also for the recovery ship to be able to get close and for teams to secure the spacecraft and ensure that it's safe for recovery.
So currently we are in a hold period of the vestibule depressurization. That's the area between the hatches that the astronauts fly through or float through when they arrive and float through when they depart. So we are holding at 5 pounds per square inch for 25 minutes to make sure that checks out, and they continue with depressurization after that. But Bob and Doug, as you can see, this view over their shoulder, it makes it look like we're on the ride with them. They have donned their suits, they are in their seats, monitoring everything on those screens aboard Crew Dragon.
Why don't we actually check in with Gary at Johnson Space Center in Houston, hear how things are going on the space station side, and how do things look at Johnson, Gary?
Hey Shiva, things are looking great here. We are also watching that vestibule depressurization, of course, complete now, holding at 5 psi. We're just looking at that thermal stabilization, just waiting for it to stabilize, balance out its swings, so we can get a nice solid leak check before continuing down close to vacuum. On the International Space Station side, we did close the A-Pass hatch, affixing that with a docking target. It's a rod with a little X at the end of it. Chris Cassidy performing those duties and taking some closeout photos, just making sure that everything was okay, checking the configuration, and that'll be reported to teams here on the ground so they understand the configuration for future crews to visit. He then loaded up that pressurized mating adapter. That was that tube that he was on the other side of which was closing the A-Pass hatch, putting some items in there for storage, and then eventually he did successfully close and lock the Node 2 forward hatch, completing his duties for the day. So he will be, of course, watching Bob and Doug depart the station. He'll be in the cupola module. This is that 7-bay window that looks right down on the Earth, provides a very good view of the Dragon departing from the forward end of the International Space Station. He'll have a camera right in his hand and be able to take some pictures as they depart the International Space Station. But the primary monitoring role will actually be in the hands of Bob and Doug, the Dragon vehicle being an autonomous departure vehicle, Bob and Doug being able to take control if necessary with the monitoring role, and then the backup monitoring role here in Mission Control Houston. So as soon as we continue this depressurization of the vestibule close to vacuum, just about 4:20 p.m. Pacific time, we're looking to conduct a go, no-go. That's, I think, a little bit less than an hour from now at this time that we'll conduct a go, no-go to start the undocking sequence. So the undocking sequence will be detaching the umbilical and then releasing 12 hooks in sets of 6, 2 sets of 6. There's going to be 2 pulses that are going to be fired from the Dragon end. They're called undocking burns, and they'll actually physically separate Dragon vehicle from the International Space Station. That's scheduled just a little bit after 4:30 p.m. Pacific time today. So far, everything looking good, holding steady right now, 5 psi, looking to continue that depressurization here soon. With that, everything looking good from the International Space Station Flight Control Room. We'll send it back over to Hawthorne.
Thanks, Gary. Appreciate that update. If you're just joining us, the Dragon spacecraft is currently forward hatch sealed. Earlier today, Bob and Doug had actually loaded some powered cargo into the vehicle, and the life support system is reactivated. And then after sealing the hatches on both the International Space Station side and stepping into the spacecraft, we did some leak checks on the suits to step into vestibule leak checks now.
Yeah, and so that vestibule area, we're holding at 5 psi, 5 pounds per square inch to conduct and make sure that it is holding and not fluctuating due to any temperature changes. Actually, the crew on the International Space Station, as I mentioned earlier, this is evening for them. And so it's actually 10:30 almost aboard the International Space Station, 10:30 p.m. And so they'll be getting ready to go to sleep soon. The crew here in Crew Dragon got to take a 3-hour nap today in the middle of the day. Looks like actually the whole crew was able to enjoy that nap. That way they'd all be alert and ready to conduct these departure procedures, whether it be sealing up the hatches or conducting any of the leak checks, monitoring the ride home. We want to make sure the astronauts are well rested, and even though the crew on the International Space Station will get their sleep period soon, we'll see Bob and Doug get theirs. They'll have about 8 hours later tonight to get some shut-eye.
Yeah, that'll actually sleep shift them well before they start to step into the deorbit burn, which is actually the largest burn of the day and actually a pretty dynamic period time for them. So I want to make sure that they are all well rested so they can monitor and step in if they have to take any contingency actions, and also read back on the status of the vehicle if ground control teams are unable to properly assess the health of the system. Of course, one of the nice things about having crew members aboard is they can see the health of the vehicle and they can respond. Bob and Doug able to issue commands via those touchscreen displays, and also getting quite a bit of training on potential emergency scenarios, wave-offs, scenarios where they might need to interact with Dragon and if it were to lose comms or have a thruster issue. But right now, very healthy vehicle. Haven't really seen any issues with Dragon during its 63-day stay at the International Space Station.
And if you are wondering, once Dragon departs today from the International Space Station, we're not going anywhere. We're actually going to be live all the way until they come home to Earth tomorrow. So some of the bigger things we can look forward to after undocking, we've got a couple of departure burns. The first two are going to bring Dragon up and over the International Space Station, and then the next two will bring it down and in front of the space station before a phasing burn later this afternoon to help it really sync up with its landing zone for tomorrow.
That's right. I might have heard a call.
Heard a little something.
Okay, there might be a call coming on space to ground. We'll be sure to keep an eye out for that.
Looks like pressure in the vestibule is still holding.
Yeah, and so as part of those burns that they have to do, the first couple of burns are really just to adjust the apogee and the perigee. So the apogee, if you can imagine the orbit of a spacecraft as an ellipse going around the Earth, the apogee is the highest point, or the point farthest away from the planet, and the perigee is the lowest point. And so right now, Dragon and the International Space Station, of course, still docked, and they're in a roughly circular orbit. After the conclusion of these departure burns, Dragon's apogee will be about 10 kilometers below the International Space Station, but we'll be slowly reducing our perigee. And then later on tonight, Pacific time, we'll actually conduct what's called a phasing burn. And the goal there is to adjust the orientation of that orbit just so we get our orbital pathway to line up over the landing site, where we will, or line up with a path that will cross over the landing site, where we can, when we issue our departure burn sequence, we'll be able to line up landing off the coast of Florida near Pensacola.
As you can see, Bob Behnken and Doug Hurley in their suits now, but after those first couple of departure burns, they'll actually be able to take off their suits, and they won't need to put them back on or don them again until tomorrow, just before the deorbit burn. And then they'll wear them the entire rest of their ride home. But for the majority of the rest of the evening after the departure burns 1 and 2, they'll be able to take off those spacesuits, relax a little bit more, enjoy their ride in Crew Dragon. And while Crew Dragon was on the International Space Station, we actually conducted some habitability tests. Of course, there's 2 astronauts flying today, but our future crews are scheduled to have 4 astronauts. So we brought in a couple of the space station's current residents to test out what it's like to have multiple people in Dragon once it's in microgravity. Performed lots of tests inside the vehicle. They had a little sleep period to see how it would be to sleep with 4 people in the vehicle, and things went pretty well. Looking forward to that first Crew 1 launch later this year.
Yeah, so right now, Dragon and the International Space Station about 422 kilometers above the Earth's surface. And going about 7.6 kilometers per second. Should be close to that 17,500 number that you probably hear pretty often.
Yes, and if you're looking at miles, it looks like we're about 261 statute miles above the Earth. And they are in the South Pacific Ocean. They'll be coming up across Hawaii not too long from now.
There's a view from the International Space Station looking at the Dragon spacecraft. So Bob and Doug inside the portion towards the right of your screen. If you can imagine how they're seating upright, their displays would sort of be looking up towards the direction the nose cone is opened up. And behind them is the trunk of the spacecraft. So that top side, the black shiny part, is actually our solar panels on the body of the spacecraft. And below that, the white side of the spacecraft is the radiator. So that's where we're radiating away our heat generated by the avionics and the electronic hardware aboard the vehicle, and of course from Bob and Doug themselves. Generating a little bit of heat based on how much physical activity and exertion they're doing. Right now it looks like they're pretty comfortable, just kind of hanging out in their suits.
And actually the vestibule leak check has started, and so they're testing to ensure the solidarity of those seals between the hatches. And as we saw earlier, they checked to make sure there was no foreign object debris or FOD, so that they would have a clean seal and be able to complete this leak check successfully, another step toward undocking.
These leak checks should be pretty fast. They'll be looking to see if there's any pressure rise on the vestibule itself, which would indicate pressure coming through the forward hatch seal.
Dragon SpaceX on the big loop. Vestibule thermal stabilization is complete and the leak check period has started. Additionally, the Dragon to ground path is now available. If you would like to swap one of your audio destinations to Dragon to ground, I am happy to support a comm check at this time.
Okay, Bob will be there.
SpaceX Dragon comm checks Dragon to ground.
I hear you loud and clear. How me?
And Anna, you came in very quiet. I'll bump up that channel and maybe we could try it again.
Copy. How is this?
That's a little bit better, Anna, but got it cranked up to be able to hear you just for your awareness. A little bit different volume between the big loop and hearing you on the big loop and hearing you on Dragon to ground.
Copy. I will make sure to talk loudly into the Dragon to ground path.
And Dragon, Houston on Dragon to ground for a comm check. How do you copy me?
And Houston, we have you loud and clear on Dragon to ground.
Actually, my bad. I was not on the correct loop. Comm check again on Dragon to ground from Houston.
Okay, Leslie, we have you loud and clear on Dragon to ground. Much clearer, much less echo on this loop than the big loop.
That's a good data point, and we also have you loud and clear down here.
So we just heard some comm checks between the crew aboard the Crew Dragon and the core here on the ground, and then with the Capcom in Houston. They're two very similar positions. We call ours the Capcom because it stands for Capsule Communicator, and we are in a capsule once again. For a few years there, obviously we were flying a space shuttle, so not quite a capsule, but before that we had Mercury, Gemini, Apollo, all capsules, and this person used to be typically an astronaut so that they could communicate any specific details about the vehicle, especially based on their previous experience. Now we have Capcoms who are not necessarily astronauts, but obviously very, very well studied in the vehicle.
Yeah, the way we refer to them is the crew's advocate on the ground. They're trying to think of things ahead of the crew and have information that the crew might need where but they tend to act as the advocate for the crew on the ground, letting them know where equipment might be stored in the vehicle, letting them know of upcoming steps. If there's any troubleshooting that the crew need to do or information that the crew need, they interact with the crew. Typically also train very closely with the crew in simulations and also during their training periods to get them familiar with all of the procedures that they need to operate in the spacecraft. Now, during those comm checks, there was some discussion about the big loop and Dragon to ground and space to ground, a lot of different loops. Really what a loop just refers to is a communications link. Operators all have the ability to talk on these loops and provide real-time communication. Usually they are redundant loops, so if you had a problem with one of the comm systems, then there's a redundant backup so you can ensure you have good voice communication with the crew. And once we get away from space station outside of the keep-out sphere and the approach ellipsoid, we'll actually transition to what's referred to as Dragon to ground. So we'll be issuing a lot of that communication via Dragon's transmitters through those TDRS satellites back to ground.
So as we mentioned earlier, 63 days aboard the International Space Station for these two spacefarers. Was not their first flight. They'd both had 2 previous shuttle missions, and they both have families that are very excited to see them once they get home. I know some folks here around at SpaceX refer to them as the space dads. Both have young boys, and I know that they have to be excited to get back to their families soon.
And the space dads actually brought a cool 0G indicator up with them. An apatosaurus, a kind of sparkly apatosaurus, who was sitting in the seat next to them for the ride up. And as I understand, their sons actually voted that that was going to be the 0G indicator between the two of them.
They're also bringing something really interesting and with a lot of history to it back to the ground. There was an American flag aboard the International Space Station that flew on the first space shuttle mission and the final space shuttle mission, and it was left aboard the space station. That way it could be retrieved by the next crew who launched from America, and so they are also bringing home that piece of history as well.
Yeah, so I was looking up some facts earlier. The first space shuttle mission in April 1981. So that flag has been to space quite a while, and it's been on station now for about 9 years, which is a pretty long time to be in space.
Yeah, it's probably traveled more miles than any human ever, or any astronaut ever, for sure.
So if you're just joining us, we're currently looking at 2 views inside the Dragon spacecraft. Right now in the seats are spacecraft commander Doug Hurley on the left-hand side, or in the left-hand seat, and Bob Behnken, the joint operations commander, in the right-hand seat. The crew got on board. They've had a relatively busy day packing cargo on board the spacecraft. They closed the forward hatch and the APAS hatch on the pressurized mating adapter on the International Space Station side. And they're currently in the middle of a vestibule leak check. So the vestibule, the space in between the 2 spacecraft, the 2 spacecraft being the International Space Station and Dragon. So we've brought that down to about 5 psi at this point, and verifying that there's no leakage from either side.
The International Space Station is also in the current proper configuration for that departure. They do something called feathering the solar arrays, and so what they do is they turn and lock them at an angle. That way, when Dragon leaves the space station, obviously it's going to use its thrusters, and those thrusters have exhaust that are emitted, and we don't want those to contaminate any of the solar cells on the arrays because that makes them less functional. They can't perform as well if they're coated in exhaust, and so those exhaust plumes avoid the solar arrays because they are feathered. And we also just don't want to put extra stress on the solar arrays. So it sounds like the International Space Station and is set up well for the upcoming departure of Crew Dragon.
And as kind of a preview of what's happening on the ground side, so operators and mission control in Houston, and of course operators here, mission control on Hawthorne, looking at the health of the vehicle systems. Right now we are in what are called joint operations because of our proximity to the International Space Station. And so in joint operations, the flight director out of Houston is actually the prime authority for any commanding or anything that'll occur up in space close to the International Space Station. So both teams are conducting health checks against a set of what we refer to as flight rules to check on the health of the vehicle, configuration of the vehicle, and then verifying that their procedures are go for undocking. All those checks happening concurrently with this leak check.
Yeah, and we'll be in those joint operations through the exit of the approach ellipsoid. So there are two invisible lines, sort of, that vehicles cross upon arrival and departure from the International Space Station, and these help us govern, you know, we have specific rules for each one that the vehicle shouldn't cross if they violate any of those. And so some of those, for the keep out sphere, that smaller sphere around the space station, we call that 4 orbits safe. So if the Dragon were for some reason lose control of any of its thrusters, it would be safe for 4 orbits if like not hitting the International Space Station if it's inside that keep out sphere. And then the approach ellipsoid has a little bit of a lesser time frame. You need to be 24 hours safe. And that gives time for the teams on the ground to troubleshoot anything that might arise, as we mentioned, if there were some reason they couldn't send commands to the vehicle or the vehicle couldn't be commanded by the astronauts. So those are typically hold points on the way up for our visiting vehicles. But on the way home, we won't be stopping any. We'll be heading straight for Earth with a splashdown planned for tomorrow.
Here's an external view of the Dragon spacecraft from the International Space Station. That structure that you see, kind of hemispherical structure on the top, is actually the nose cone. And then on the right-hand side of your screen is that pressurized mating adapter that we saw the crew in earlier. So Commander Chris Cassidy aboard the space station, closing the APAS hatch and Node 2 forward hatch on those two. And of course, Bob and Doug closing the Dragon forward hatch. And much later on in the mission, right before we are planning to step into, right before we really re-enter the Earth's atmosphere, we'll end up closing that nose cone to protect the sensors and thrusters that live underneath it.
Another thing we'll also see happen is the jettison of the trunk. And so the trunk was on the end of Crew Dragon. You could see it had the solar cells wrapped around it, helping Dragon gather power from the sun. And that'll be removed. There you can see it again. It's got some fins on it back there. That will not return to Earth with the Crew Dragon capsule. That will actually burn up upon re-entry into the Earth's atmosphere. And that's where, on the way up, we would be able to store any unpressurized cargo. So if there were something that we'd like to install on the outside of the International Space Station, that would be a good place to put it. And the astronauts could use that. It's an extra trunk. I mean, it's exactly what it is. So it's not for any of their personal luggage, but it's great for any of that unpressurized cargo.
Yeah, those aerodynamic fins are actually pretty important. If there were a launch escape event, those aerodynamic fins provide stability to the vehicle as it were to separate from Falcon 9. Of course, we didn't need to see that during this mission, and hopefully we won't see that ever since the in-flight abort mission that happened. And the back on the trunk also contains the thermal coolant loops for the vehicle, so we radiate away heat to space. Of course, on planet Earth, you can sort of just push a breeze by you to get some nice cooling, but in space, you have to radiate away all that heat because there's it's a vacuum around you, so you can't take advantage of convective heat transfer away from the spacecraft. Although, interesting tidbit, there is just enough of an atmosphere to be a drag, and actually the International Space Station needs to do periodic reboosts to stay in its orbit, right?
And they did one of those very recently. That was factored into Dragon's departure procedures as the International Space Station used its thrusters to reboost it, and in preparation for this October, when it will have a Soyuz vehicle arrive with some brand new crew members. And so this was factored into Dragon's departure sequence, knowing at which altitude the International Space Station would be flying. And it looks right now the International Space Station is flying 262 statute miles over the North Pacific Ocean. It looks like they will be crossing into North America soon, and specifically coming up over the coast of Oregon.
Guys, yes, so we are 44
kind of a preview of what's coming up next.
minutes from undocking.
Currently conducting a leak check of the vestibule. Now,
Okay.
particularly important because any breathable gas that you bring with you into space is what you bring on your spaceship. So the International Space Station with a supply of breathable gases, and of course Dragon with tanks aboard that contain nitrogen and oxygen, and the life support system providing periodic injections of oxygen to keep the cabin at about 20 to 25% oxygen, which is about what we would have actually here on Earth.
And we don't want an oxygen-rich environment because...
So doing a leak check, making sure that we're not losing any of that precious breathable gas through the forward hatch seal, which has been open really this entire time while we've been on space station.
We've seen a few milestones happen so far today. Of course, we've got a lot to look forward to, but we saw the Dragon hatch close earlier after Bob and Doug were safely inside. Shortly thereafter, Chris Cassidy closed the space station side. That's the APAS hatch, and then eventually the Node 2 hatch. That allowed us to step into this vestibule depressurization period, bringing that space in between those hatches down to as close to a vacuum as we can possibly bring it before departure later. So yes, now conducting those leak checks, and then we will be looking for a go, no-go for undock coming up at 4:20 Pacific.
So, guys, yes. So, I was saying we
during that
don't need oxygen-rich environment, because oxygen-rich environment is very prone to catching fire. So, yeah, that's why we need some atmosphere, the air mixed with oxygen as well as with that nitrogen.
Call up to the crew, see if they're ready to come on home. And then ground operators here in Hawthorne will issue a command to the Dragon spacecraft that will begin the process of detaching the umbilicals that are providing power and telemetry from the space station to the Dragon spacecraft, and then actually removing those 12 hard capture hooks that are keeping the vestibule leak tight right now. And Dragon will do a couple of undocking burns as well, short little thrusts.
Yes, two.
From the surface section.
Very short. Will actually specifically be 1.5 seconds and then another for 5 seconds. So I think Gary described them earlier as pulses. I think that's a great way to describe them rather than necessarily as long as a burn. But even our departure burns later are short to start off with. Departure burn 0 looking to be about 12 seconds long, and then departure burn 1 for 20 seconds. And those increase the opening rate between the spacecraft and the International Space Station. And after that departure burn 1, they can take off their suits, get comfortable, and relax until time for that deorbit burn tomorrow.
Okay, so yeah.
Yeah, the deorbit burn is a pretty big burn, and the departure phasing burn is actually a very large burn. Departure phasing should last about 6 minutes or so,
and
the
deorbit
burn will actually be on the order of 9 to 10 minutes. Definitely the largest thrusts of at least the return portion of the mission. And for the phasing burn, that's really to line us up with our potential landing site over Pensacola in the Gulf of Mexico. And the deorbit burn will reduce our perigee, or the lowest point of Dragon's orbit, so that we end up getting caught by the Earth's atmosphere. Dragon will actually then get a chance to use its heat shield and slow down against the Earth's atmosphere. And then once we get to the right sort of pressure characteristics and altitude characteristics as sensed by the vehicle, then we'll have the drogue chutes deploy, slow us down even further before finally seeing those 4 main chutes deploy. that'll bring Dragon down to a nice, gentle landing in the ocean.
And I learned something really interesting about parachutes. So whenever you see those drogue chutes deployed, they don't automatically inflate right away. It's because they're doing something called reefing, and that keeps the air from flowing into the parachute too quickly and shocking the parachute system on Crew Dragon. So they expand very slowly and begin to slow the vehicle down rather than all at once and giving a jolt to the spacecraft.
Yeah, and actually even with the drogue chutes and the main chutes opening slowly, Bob and Doug will still experience somewhere between 4 and 5 Gs of acceleration. So, 1 G is what we experience sort of just standing here. If you can imagine yourself being 4 times or 5 times as heavy just for that brief period of time, that's about how much force they'll experience. Of course, both of them test pilots. Test pilots usually train up to, depending on if you're in the Navy or the Air Force, 7 to 9 Gs. So nothing that they're probably unfamiliar with.
Exactly.
So you've got this really good close-up view of Crew Dragon attached to the International Space Station. That's the Node 2 forward hatch. You can see the nose cone is open. That will be closed later after the departure burn and prior to re-entry, but that is how the astronauts ingressed or entered the International Space Station when they arrived 63 days ago, and how they exited the space station when they prepare to depart today. So this is a great view, and that's where we will begin to see some movement once that undocking command is sent later this afternoon.
Exactly. So guys, what was I saying? I forgot. Yeah, the yellow thing which you saw on the spacecraft, that is effect of the radiation, cosmic galactic radiation, as well as from the sun, solar winds and solar radiation. That is all to do with the radiation only.
So some more facts about our astronauts today. We mentioned that they have had 2 previous flights on the space shuttle, and this is their first flight not on a space shuttle, and so they both just logged 63 days aboard the space station. It'll be 64 by the time they return home. So Doug Hurley will have a total of 93 days in space over his 3 space flights, 2 on the shuttles, including that last shuttle mission. And then Bob Behnken will have logged a total of 92 days in space over his 3 flights. So very close there. But adding up some time aboard the International Space Station.
And Bob Behnken actually getting some pretty cool opportunities to conduct a number of spacewalks with Chris Cassidy, going outside the space station, conducting some work to replace power units and batteries on the space station?
Yes, they actually replaced some older nickel hydrogen batteries with some newer lithium ion batteries, and these upgrades have been going on for a few years now. And the astronauts were very efficient. They conducted 4 spacewalks, Chris Cassidy and Bob Behnken. And in the meantime, Doug Hurley was inside, and he was controlling the Canadarm2. That's the robotic arm on the International Space Station. And so all 3 with a very important role in those spacewalks. And it became quite a milestone for Behnken and Cassidy. They both now have conducted 10 spacewalks in their career, and that ties them with the most spacewalks by an American astronaut. They're now tied with 10 with Mike Lopez Alegria and Peggy Whitson.
Okay.
Dragon SpaceX, we had a good vestibule leak check.
I can copy. It's good news. Thank you.
This is what we wanted. Everything.
There's confirmation from the Corps
should be
of successful leak check on the vestibule. That means 1 more milestone down and getting ready for undock.
Yeah, and that wraps up the completion of those leak checks, as you mentioned, in that small space between Crew Dragon and the space station, the vestibule. It was brought down from a pressure of, it looked like 14.1 pounds per square inch, and then to 5. So they had that hold period and then conducted leak checks. But that 14.1 was the same as the rest of the station. Now they are offset quite a bit, and so they're going to bring that all the way down to vacuum, since that's what they will be exposed to, the hatches, I mean, once Crew Dragon Endeavour begins its journey home.
Yeah, and actually, if we didn't bring that space down to vacuum, then it would almost act like a thruster. There'd be a little bit of pressure left up in there, and so as the seals came or as the seals were sort of opened up and we removed those hard capture hooks, we'd see a little propulsive thrust. And of course, being this close to station, we want every maneuver to be very carefully choreographed. So trying to make sure there's as little energy imparted by that little bit of pressure in the mating adapter.
So that we don't interfere with any instruments or any material of the International Space Station, because we don't want to damage that.
So actually would be a great time to hear what's going on at Mission Control Houston and get an update on the space station. Gary, can you let us know how it's going?
Hey Shiva, we're watching the depressurization of the vestibule now. It's a little bit less than 4.5 psi, a little bit slower than what we saw just a little bit an hour ago when we went from about the pressure of sea level down to 5 psi. That really only taking a few minutes. This one's a little bit slower, but we are seeing a good depressurization of the vestibule, those all being controlled from the Dragon side, and we're monitoring here from Mission Control Houston. Now, some of the views you might see from the outside of the International Space Station looking at the Dragon vehicle, some of those cameras being controlled from Mission Control in Japan. Working from here in Mission Control Houston with the Japanese Mission Control Room to make sure we're going to get good views with those cameras. We're going to get a little pan as the Dragon makes its way away from the International Space Station, and that first departure burn 0, brings it a little bit faster away from the station. We'll get a nice view from the Japanese side of the International Space Station. Right now, the International Space Station configured for undocking. We do have those solar arrays feathered. That's in a locked position.
Station Houston on the Big Loop. Endeavour's undock sequence start time is planned for 23:30 GMT. That is 28 minutes from now.
Okay, time has changed.
You heard that from Capcom here in Mission Control Houston. That is Leslie Ringo here in Mission Control Houston. That start time is 4:30 p.m. Pacific, 6:30 p.m. Central. That is the on-time start time for the undocking sequence. Once that kicks off, that'll be the initiation of the umbilical retraction, followed by 12 hooks that are keeping Dragon in place attached to the International Space Station. Those will drive and be released 6 at a time. They're in 2 gangs. And then, of course, there's 2 undocking burns, more like pulses, just short little burps, that are going to physically separate Dragon from the International Space Station vehicle. You can hear right now everything going according to plan. We're right on the timeline. That physical separation, as long as we're on the timeline, should happen at 4:34 and 58 seconds p.m. Pacific time. Everything going well. We'll continue to monitor the depressurization of the vestibule from here in Mission Control Houston. Until then, we'll send it back over to you in Hawthorne.
Thanks, Gary. So once Bob Behnken and Doug Hurley arrived at the space station on May 31st, it did not take them long to get to work. During the time on board the orbiting laboratory, as we mentioned, Bob Behnken ventured outside the hatch 4 times for spacewalks to upgrade those batteries, and Doug Hurley used the Canadarm2 to
so they messed up the times there, guys. The mission control says it will be happen at 4 minutes earlier, and that guy said 4 minutes after. So let's just see.
As we mentioned, they also exercised the mandatory 2 hours each day. And many of you have seen some of the incredible pictures that they took of our home planet. This is one beautiful view of a sun glint off the ocean. And then there's also one that we have from Comet Neowise in July. If you had the opportunity to see that from the ground, we saw our astronauts had a great shot of that from the International Space Station.
Yeah, they had some really cool opportunities. We're sharing a lot of those photos on Twitter. And of course, you know, earlier this morning as they've been preparing for undocking, they had some work to do as well in packing cargo into the Dragon spacecraft. So underneath their seats, they've got room for powered and unpowered cargo. Right now, they're bringing home about 150 kilograms or about 330 pounds of cargo. Most of that is science and sampling hardware. About 94 kilograms, or about 200 pounds of it, is science that's happening aboard the space station. And Dragon does have the ability to return a lot of that cargo, so it can come back to labs here on Earth who can continue to do human science studies on those biological samples and cold sample studies, on those cold samples that they're returning. And it's really something that we've been doing even since our previous version of Cargo Dragon, just continuing that capability with Crew Dragon.
Yeah, that's one thing I was going to mention. When the astronauts know that there is a Crew Dragon or a Cargo Dragon vehicle coming, they know it's about to get really busy with a lot of science. Because Cargo Dragon is currently the only vehicle cargo resupply ship we have that can bring back cargo. The others disintegrate, burn up in the Earth's atmosphere upon re-entry. So we mentioned earlier that Comet Neowise picture, and I think we have it now. Yeah. Look at how beautiful that is. The comet streaking across the sky just above the Earth below. I can't imagine.
Yeah, especially to see the glow of the Earth's atmosphere kind of creating that blue sheen as the light refracts off of it. Really cool.
And this was probably taken from the cupola window, and that's, as Gary mentioned, that bay window area on the International Space Station that faces down toward Earth. It's truly the best view in the house. Chris Cassidy might head over there after undocking today to take a look outside and watch as his friends depart. We saw that on the way uphill, he was in there monitoring their arrival and taking some pictures of Crew Dragon as it arrived as well. But aside from all of that science talk, we'll also be returning some vehicle hardware like spacewalking cooling garments, which the astronauts wear under their extravehicular mobility unit suits. There's tubes of water that they can control the temperature of. So when they are in the sun, outside of the space station, it can be up to 250 degrees Fahrenheit.
Wow.
And when they are in the darkness and outside the space station, it can be negative 250 degrees Fahrenheit. So that cooling garment is also, in a way, a little bit of a heating garment and can help them control their temperature when they're outside on a spacewalk. So we'll be returning some of those. Also some glove connectors for refurbishment back on Earth, and along with any crew provisions like food, small electronics, and even their sleeping bags. NASA will have cargo specialists embedded with the recovery team. They'll be able to quickly recover and unload that returned cargo very shortly after Dragon returns on the recovery ship to shore tomorrow.
Yeah, and it was really interesting. You're mentioning the wide temperature variations. That's something you don't really see on Earth because we have air and we have humidity in the air that helps us sort of regulate that temperature. Of course, you don't have all that humidity and atmosphere around you to help with that. So when you're in the sun, you're getting the full brunt of that heat, and when you're not, you're getting the full coolness of being in eclipse. And so that's part of the reason why you need those extra vehicular suits, as well as like the thermal systems on Dragon, to help regulate that temperature into something that is palatable for humans.
And speaking of heat and atmosphere, when the astronauts re-enter tomorrow, they will be traveling, or they will experience temperatures up to 3,500 degrees outside the crew vehicle. Inside it'll be nice and cool. They've got some air conditioning, and their suits will have cooled air venting through them. So that's a pretty fiery re-entry tomorrow.
And that's what we call some minutes of terror, and you can say that is the most complex part of this mission. Not because that re-entry part is not in our control. Whatever happens because of the atmosphere. And
another view on your screen of the Dragon spacecraft, and now looking at a camera that's positioned just behind Bob and Doug.
Is
so
always
Doug
dangerous.
In the left-hand seat, Bob in the right-hand seat, monitoring the vehicle. Looks like they've got the forward view, so on each of their individual panels. You can sort of tell that because it looks like they've got an attitude ring in front of them. And then they've got a view in the middle that has their procedures and cue cards up for what they can expect next. And speaking of which, actually, so then the next thing we'll really see here is final configuration for undocking. So there'll be a go, no-go poll for issuing that final configuration. We're expecting that to happen, the actual command to occur right on time at 4:30 p.m. Pacific time. And then shortly after that, we'll have a couple of those undocking bursts that will just separate any sort of friction, any sort of forces that may have statically built up while Dragon's been hanging out on station. And separation is planned for 4:34 p.m. Pacific time, 4:34 and 58 seconds, actually.
Yes, so from the time that command is sent from the ground to start undocking, as you mentioned, those hooks have to be retracted, those 12 hooks, 2 sets of 6. The umbilical that has been providing power to Dragon from the International Space Station will detach, and they will use those 2 short bursts to begin their journey home.
Again, a lot of those steps are automated. Once we issue the command for undocking configuration, operators here in Mission Control will be monitoring that Dragon performs the correct state transitions. Dragon has flight computers aboard that they're triplicated for redundancy, so if one of the flight computers gets out of sync with the others, you still have the other 2 to make a good call. And of course, we have ways of resetting them and trying to understand those faults. That's part of the job of the mission controllers, to make sure they understand the health and status of the vehicle. So those flight computers will transition the vehicle through a number of states.
We have 3 flight computers, guys. We need 3 computers separate because the radiation messes up with the electronics, and we don't want those electronics to get you can say messed up because of the radiation, and that's why we have 3 computers, and all those 3 computers are synced up. And whenever if anything you can say if one of the computer is you can say destroyed by the radiation, then the other 2 computers detect that, and they reset the first computer, and then again they all get synced up. So that's how they
Yes, those will
check
be
all
departure
those
burn
things.
0 and 1. Then that'll just increase the opening rate, the distance from the space station, and moving it out of the keep-out sphere, as we mentioned earlier, and eventually the approach ellipsoid. And then after it's out of the approach ellipsoid, it'll have departure burns 2 and 3. Departure burn 3, as you mentioned earlier, is like a co-elliptic burn. So it puts it on the same orbit all the way around, rather than necessarily having a widely varying apogee and perigee, or higher point of the orbit and lowest point of the orbit.
Yeah, and we were talking a little bit about the keep-out sphere and the approach ellipsoid. So those are imaginary spheres. The keep-out sphere being a 200-meter radius, I believe, sphere around the International Space Station. So that represents a space where any spacecraft that are in those operations need very choreographed maneuvers with the flight director before they issue any commands or perform any thrusts.
Station and Dragon crew on the big loop. I want to let you know that at this time we are removing ISS power to Endeavour.
We have a power transfer here, guys. The power is going internal base, meaning the Dragon will take care of the power requirement itself rather than taking
So call
power
there from the Capcom saying
from the space station
that both the station crew and of course Bob and Doug no longer receiving power from the International Space Station through those umbilicals on the docking mechanism.
Yeah, so Dragon is operating on its own power, generated and gathered by those solar panels wrapped around the trunk of the vehicle. And that's actually a very similar look to the new cargo Dragon. For all of the Dragon missions until now, we saw solar wings with solar arrays, and now the cargo Dragon missions will have the solar arrays wrapped around the vehicle, just like we see here with Crew Dragon.
Yeah, and actually it's something that adds to the overall reliability of the vehicle. Anytime you have a mechanism in space that's potential for something to go wrong, you need a motor to drive it. You need checkouts potentially on the actuators. There's probably software that drives it. So having conformally wrapped solar panels around the trunk of the vehicle reduces that little bit of complexity, and actually ends up being a little bit lighter too. So we can add a little more cargo and add a little bit more to other parts of the system. And then on the other side of the trunk is the thermal radiator. So we've got a fluid running through that, almost like an air conditioner. And that fluid is being pumped throughout various different points in the vehicle. Actually, earlier on, we heard a call from the core mentioning that the crew could adjust the hex or heat exchanger to the position that they wanted to control internal cabin temperature. So that part of the cabin air as it goes through the revitalization system is getting passed over that heat exchanger, and that allows the crew to keep it nice and comfortable inside the cabin.
I hope they both like the same temperature, because I like to keep it warm, and I hope they both like it cool or warm, or they can agree on temperature for the long ride home.
Well, taking a look at some of their interviews, I think Bob and Doug have expressed just how close of friends they are. So I'm sure it's something that they've worked out over time. I think earlier I took a look and it was about 76 degrees Fahrenheit in the cabin. So definitely to my tastes.
Yeah, I could survive in that. And yeah, you mentioned they are very close. They were selected as part of the same astronaut class. So they went through astronaut training together and ultimately remained very close friends and now get to fly a once-in-a-lifetime mission like this.
Yeah. I mean, flying a test mission together with your best friend has got to be very fun. Of course, our favorite space dads here at SpaceX.
So just a look at these two mission controls. On the left, you have the International Space Station Flight Control Room in Houston, and that's the team that's monitoring and sending signals and controlling the International Space Station side of these operations. It is staffed 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. We've always got someone in there protecting the astronauts in space, making sure that everything is working well on the International Space Station. And then on the right, Shiva, why don't you introduce us to the Mission Control Hawthorne?
Yeah, so this is Mission Control in Hawthorne. It's actually right behind us where we're standing here in Hawthorne. And in that room is a number of specialists as well as the primary Dragon operators. Of course, if you've tuned in for some of our other webcasts, you've seen Mission Control as well. We use that same control room for Falcon missions, and that's where the Falcon operators stand in. But today, the third row is where most of the primary operators are, and then we have a number of specialists sitting in other roles, folks who have really devoted the larger part of their careers and a lot of their expertise to understanding the nuances of the life support system or the propellant system, and even, of course, the health and safety of the crew. We have a flight surgeon, actually a NASA flight surgeon, who is in that front row, and he's there as well to make sure that Bob and Doug, if they have any sort of complaints from a physiological perspective, that he can weigh in and help them stay healthy. So really a big team to help make sure that Bob and Doug get home safely, both from the vehicle performing well as their own individual health.
Yeah, and speaking of the vehicle, that vestibule
We
pressure
are
is
just
now at
14
less
minutes
than
from the
0.3
undocking to
PSI. So
happen,
getting
guys.
down there as close as it can to a vacuum. But yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that the astronauts have a flight doctor. They have somebody who's specifically assigned to them for all of their pre-flight medical and their in-flight medical and their post-flight. Somebody that is able to speak with them at almost any time and conduct health checks and just wellness checks and make sure that everything is going well while they're in this very, very rough environment of space.
Yeah, I mean, among the cargo that they have aboard is emergency medical kits and actually medical sort of medicine and like trauma kits that they would use if there were a significant medical emergency. And so the flight surgeon can help them as they're working through first aid and give them specific instructions, since if they need to do anything in an emergency scenario, it's those two taking care of each other. And of course, when the hatch was open, the entire International Space Station crew of this expedition taking care of each other.
I see. So we are...
So at this point, we're about 13 minutes away from the transition for undocking, and then about 5 minutes after that, we'll have the 2 undocking burns happen, really just short little bursts from those service section Dracos.
Okay.
We're expecting separation to happen around 4:35 p.m. Pacific time, just a few seconds before that. Heard a go, no-go poll earlier from the mission control teams that we were talking about earlier.
So just like it's during its approach to the International Space Station, Dragon's departure and deorbit is designed to be fully autonomous, so it requires no action from the crew on board. Station Commander Chris Cassidy, he won't be the prime for monitoring Dragon's departure. That'll be done by the crew on Dragon. They'll be able to monitor with these screens you see here, and they'll be backed up by flight controllers on the ground. But as always, Bob and Doug will have the ability to send commands manually to the vehicle if they need to.
And once the undocking sequence is complete, Dragon will then use its Draco engines. It'll thrust away from the station in a series of pretty carefully choreographed maneuvers or 4 departure burns to increase that distance between the 2 spacecraft. And then from there, it'll perform a phasing burn that will put it on the right trajectory to get back to Earth and the landing site.
Next on its trip home is deorbit, entry and landing. And that covers all operations after the final departure remover. That includes trunk separation, closure of the nose cone, deorbit burn, and deployment of the drogue and main parachutes, and finally, splashdown off the Florida coast, at which point our teams will recover Bob Behnken and Doug Hurley inside Crew Dragon from the water.
At this point, a little bit ahead of schedule. We always put in a little bit of margin into the schedule in case there were any problems with, for example, the suits or if the leak check didn't quite go as planned. Right now, the planned time to perform the undocking commands to the spacecraft will be around 4:30 p.m. Pacific time. And we'll expect to see Dragon go through a number of state transitions as well as transitions of its life support system. And then shortly after, we'll see those Dracos come to life very briefly, just to unstick ourselves from the space station and then thrust away from where it's called home for the past 63 days.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, those will be the service section Draco thrusters. Those are what are used when the spacecraft is around the International Space Station. We don't want to use something as powerful as those nose cone thrusters, the forward bulkhead thrusters, I should say, just yet. But that's what we will see being used for the deorbit burn tomorrow.
Yeah, those forward bulkhead thrusters just a little bit more efficient because they can expand the propulsive gases a little bit more. Sort of the principle of providing thrust to a rocket vehicle is you burn some kind of propellant or have some kind of gas that you expend from the vehicle, and that mass that you're ejecting away from your launch or from your spacecraft is through Newton's laws pushing you and giving you some momentum. So those forward bulkhead Dracos, when we use the thrust out of those, the propulsive gases in there, we're able to more fully expand than we are on the service section Dracos. Gives us a little bit better performance. But of course, they're pointed directly at the space station. So any of that propulsive gas that we're shooting out from Dragon would, of course, go directly then to the space station, which is not ideal.
I just heard the call that Mission Control Houston is go
Dragon
for undocking.
SpaceX on the big loop. The final reconfigurations for undock are complete and nominal. The ground is go for undocking at the undocking sequence start time of 23:30 GMT. Please confirm your visors are down and that you are ready for undock and departure.
Dragon copies, go for undock on time. Our visors are down and we're ready for departure.
We copy all.
There goes the beep beep sound of the classic Apollo era.
And we just heard the confirmation. Dragon is a go to undock. So now we are waiting for the undocking sequence to actually begin, and they are targeting that for 4:30 p.m. Pacific time, so it looks like 8 minutes from now. And once that begins, it'll take less than 5 minutes for Dragon to separate from the International Space Station, which has called home for 2 months now.
Now, the first step in the undocking sequence, which is, again, automatic, is for the umbilicals that are providing power, telemetry, and commanding capability between the space station and Dragon for those to retract. Once those retract, we'll actually have Dragon perform an unlatch from the space station, releasing 12 hard capture hooks that are around the vestibule. Those hard capture hooks are what are providing that airtight seal around the vestibule, and they'll actually come in 2 separate phases. So we'll hear a call for 6 of those, and then we'll hear a call for all of those being detached. And then finally, after that entire process, which takes about 4.5 minutes, then Dragon will be ready to actually depart and push itself away and separate using its Draco thrusters.
Yeah, and so Dragon's initial departure from station is a little different from any of the other docked vehicles like the Soyuz, because that relies on springs to push them away from the docking port. In this case, Dragon will actually execute those 2 short thruster firings to undock. That uses a combination of those 12 Draco engines around the base of the capsule, with the first breaking any stiction between Dragon and the docking port, and the second slowly backing the spacecraft away. And so we're expecting the call for undocking sequence to begin in the next few minutes.
And
the crew aboard, they will be able to see those transitions. So what will be happening here is the flight computers on the vehicle will issue themselves into a state when that command is issued. And actually on the crew displays, on every display, they've got a prominent location that shows what the current states are. They're also able to follow along and see what the state of the vehicle is. So those are the displays that they've got pulled up on their screen right now. That middle display actually has the cards that describe what they can expect to see, along with some inline telemetry that they're getting from the vehicle directly, as well as their current positioning relative to the International Space Station. And then they've also got some views on the side that are each of them in their respective displays that are showing a forward view of the spacecraft as well as the status of those docking hooks.
Guys, we are just 6 minutes away from the undocking to happen. Are you guys excited, guys? Are you guys excited?
At this
We
point,
wish
the umbilicals
safe
both
travel
still
for Bob
installed,
Behnken
so
and
that
Doug
command has not been
Hurley
issued.
for their return to home.
And the vestibule should be pretty close to vacuum.
Getting closer every second to that undocking command being sent. We're looking for that in about 5 minutes from now.
Taking a look at data here, I see the vestibule is reading as 0.1 psi. So definitely not very friendly to humans.
Okay, so everything is looking good. We are ready for a good separation now, and just small checks here and there, and this craft will undock itself. And then finally we'll have
everything moving smoothly throughout the day to bring us to this point with the crew ingressing Dragon, donning their suits, getting in their seats, closing the hatch, and then Chris Cassidy closing the A-Pass hatch on the station side, along with that Node 2 forward hatch, bringing that space down to as close to a vacuum as possible, and that's where we're at right now. Conducted some leak checks to ensure the seals between those hatches were solid. Everything looking good for an on-time departure today.
Guys, just hit the like button and
pretty comfy in the cabin right now. You know, that vestibule is pretty near vacuum, but in the cabin it's actually pretty close to what we would see at sea level, and still about 76 degrees in there, so pretty comfortable. Of course, Bob and Doug are only partially seeing that. Earlier they closed down their visors, and so the suits that they're wearing protect them in the event of a depressurization event. They also protect them if there was a fire on board, as they're made of fire-resistant materials. And so as we're getting to this critical step of separating from the space station, if something were to go wrong here, those suits would provide that critical life support to them, pressurizing if the cabin pressure were to unexpectedly drop. It's actually part of the reason why we've spent so long in this vestibule depressurization. The operators, both on the space station side and the mission control Hawthorne side, scrutinizing the data for any indication of a leak through the forward hatch. Of course, that leak check performed earlier with no findings, showing that the vehicle is nominal and ready for undocking.
And as once we mentioned, that undocking will take a few minutes before we actually see the separation occur. But once the command is sent, those 12 latches will be retracted. The umbilical will be disconnected. Dragon is already on internal power, however. It's not receiving any power from the International Space Station. But once that umbilical is retracted, those hooks are removed. Be looking for those 2 short bursts to send Dragon on its way, and then things will speed up with those departure burns afterward.
Oh, it's getting now. We are 2 minutes 30 seconds from the undocking to occur. And we will see the spacecraft moving away from the ISS, and that would be so cool to see, right? Those astronauts are just being comfy and checking all the systems are
just a couple of minutes away from that on-time undocking. That'll be 4:30 p.m. Pacific, 11:30 p.m. GMT, or the time that the astronauts use aboard the International Space Station.
Oh, it's getting real now. Okay. So now they have switched over. They will be switching over to the animations, which will control the thrusters. Yeah, here we go. Already the Doug Hurley sides has that window. Yeah, there we go. Because that is what they need to know. The center one provides them with all the current information, and now I think he has opened the switch over to the cam view of the hatch. And yeah, the SpaceX has its own this docking simulator, the actual docking simulator which you are seeing right now on the spacecraft. You can also play that thing on your browser.
Looking for the undocking command to be sent in just about 30 seconds.
Okay, cool. So yeah, log on to the SpaceX.com and you'll be able to play that.
And again, a quick preview of what we expect to happen. Umbilicals will retract, then we'll see those docking hooks disconnect, and then we'll actually see those undocking burns, followed pretty shortly after by a departure burn.
30 seconds left. And
Dragon SpaceX, undock sequence commanded.
Okay.
Pepper copies.
That undocking sequence right on time.
And that was 4:30 p.m. Pacific time, 11:30 p.m. GMT. The umbilical now retracting.
Undocking.
The International Space Station flying 263 statute miles over Namibia,
and we lost
Africa.
Okay, we must be seeing those things happening.
Dragon SpaceX, umbilical demate complete and nominal.
There we go.
There's confirmation of the umbilicals retracted, so no longer receiving power or data or commanding from the International Space Station. And there's a view on your screen of Dragon, currently in eclipse. Gary, how's it looking from mission control at Johnson?
It is in progress, guys, and
we're looking good, Shiva. We are now inside the undocking sequence. Good umbilical retraction. Standing by for the driving of those hooks. There's 12 hooks that will be released in 2 gangs of 6. Standing by for the driving of the hooks.
Okay, just listen to the mission control. That will give you the most information. And
here we have good motion on the primary set of hooks.
Once it retracts back, then the onboard lighting system of this Crew Dragon, the brightness will be there in the view. Right now the hard mate, which is there with the 12 claws kind of a structure, they are being retracted, if I'm not wrong. And then in about 3 minutes or so,
again, first set of hooks driving the navigation light. The forward end of Dragon clearly visible from this view from one of the Japanese cameras.
Yeah, so then after some time, a couple of minutes, you can say a burn of 1.5 second burn, and then a 5-second burn will occur. Pulses, as they say, which will basically push the craft away from the ISS. This is not a traditional thing, because the traditional spacecraft uses springs for the same effect to occur. And everything is good. We just need to hear.
Again, we are inside of the undocking sequence now. Good umbilical retraction, and we're driving the first set of hooks.
Dragon SpaceX, first set of hooks open and nominal.
Okay. Right now they are the claws are open.
Nominal hooks in the first set.
Okay. First set of hooks have.
The first 6 hooks have completed their driving. First set down. The second set is now driving. We're now committed to undock.
I see. Okay. This is the Japanese cam view which you are seeing right now, and I don't know what's with that green light. Maybe a thing to research about, and I'll be able to tell you more info about it in the next undocking sequence maybe. Right now I don't know about this green light, but yeah, this is the thing which needs to be noticed and researched.
Seeing good motion on that second set of hooks. Continuing to drive.
second set of hooks.
These will be the final set of hooks. There's 6 of them holding Dragon into place now. Afterwards, we'll conduct 2 undocking burns to physically separate Dragon.
Yeah, undocking burns. So right now the final set of hooks are moving away, if I'm not wrong, and then the undocking burns will occur. And those thrusters are placed near the nose cone only, so as to thrust it, I think, yeah, so as to thrust it back from the away from the ISS. Maybe high river racer, maybe it's a glare from night vision camera. And
Dragon
here you can
SpaceX,
see
all hooks open and nominal.
See those thrusters firing up. Did you see? Yeah.
All hooks open.
Wow.
Dragon departing.
Dragon SpaceX, separation confirmed.
Wow. This is so cool, right?
Okay, separation.
Great burns. Physical separation, 4:35 p.m. Pacific. Thrusters looking good. Counting down to a nominal departure burn 0 coming up shortly.
Thrusters are looking good. They are going, and we have undocking confirmed, guys. We can see the craft departing back right now. Oh, this is so cool. Okay. Satellite change there. Such a mesmerizing view, right? Wow.
Dragon SpaceX, depart burn 0 complete.
Okay, so there are 3 burns if I'm not wrong.
Copy complete. We're visors up.
And you heard depart burn 0 complete, that 12-second firing, moving Dragon slightly faster away from the International Space Station using those service section Dracos.
Oh, so finally they
And with that,
are
Bob and Doug have
returning.
concluded their stay aboard the International Space Station. They're on their way back to planet Earth. Confirms a physical separation at 4:35 p.m. Pacific as the station and Dragon were flying 267 statute miles over Johannesburg, South Africa. 2 good undocking burns and a nominal departure burn 0. Next departure burn coming up in about 5 minutes.
Right.
We'll be monitoring Crew Dragon throughout the departure sequence, but with Dragon flying free, that'll do it from us here in Mission Control Houston. Godspeed, Bob and Doug. To take you through the rest of the departure sequence, we'll send you back over to Hawthorne.
As it would have looked more beautiful if it.
Thanks, Gary.
it would
Departure
have
burn 0
happened
sets Crew Dragon
in the sunlight.
and Bob and Doug on their journey home. Dragon ship Endeavour is now on a trajectory to head up and over the station before additional maneuvers will change its orbital path to take it below and in front of the station. Dragon will autonomously accomplish that through 3 additional departure burns, with that next one coming up in just a couple of minutes to get Bob Behnken and Doug Hurley well away from the space station and on their way home.
Oh.
Beautiful view. Just had a beautiful view there of the relative navigation sensors providing an infrared view of the International Space Station as Bob and Doug drift away from it. And of course, as they are drifting away, going into that slightly higher orbit, just because of balancing the force of gravity along with their centripetal acceleration, they will move a little bit slower than the space station. And so we'll expect space station to sort of drift ahead, and then as they conduct those additional burns, getting out of the approach ellipsoid and the keep out sphere, then they will come back down below space station with their apogee being about 10 kilometers below space station and slowly reducing their perigee.
Next up in just a couple of minutes, scheduled for 4:40 p.m. Pacific time and 11:40 p.m. GMT will be depart burn 1. That's a 20-second burn to further increase the opening rate between Crew Dragon and the International Space Station.
First of all,
yeah, that view, what we just previously had, and you can actually see it on the right-hand screen of Bob's display, is a relative navigation sensor that's providing an infrared view from the forward hatch of Dragon, looking back towards the forward module of the International Space Station. So that's where Dragon has been for the last 63 days. Coming up in less than a minute is departure burn number 1.
And
this burn coming just about 5 minutes after separation.
That will,
and this is going to increase that opening rate.
That will take the
between the space station and Dragon.
And separation occurred on time today, as with everything else occurring on schedule, sending Bob Behnken and Doug Hurley back toward Earth, back toward home.
It will take the spacecraft above
so
the
very exciting moment. We should expect to hear a call out here for departure burn number 1. Departure burn number 1 is pretty short. It only lasts about 21 seconds, but it's the burn that's going to get us on our way up, out, and away through the keep out sphere and through the approach ellipsoid. Again, the keep out sphere, about 200-meter sphere around the International Space Station, and the approach ellipsoid, 4 by 4 by 2 kilometer ellipse. If you imagine 2 Central Parks in New York City next to each other, that's about how big that is. Just guidance references for visiting vehicles.
And we're seconds away now from departure burn 1. These are autonomous burns. Bob Behnken and Doug Hurley are not pushing any buttons to make this happen. These are programmed into Dragon, and we will be looking for that in just a few seconds from now.
And we should, oh yeah, here we go. We have the view.
That's a view from the space station. Those 2 lights, the green light is the view that on the right-hand side of the Dragon vehicle. That would be the side that Bob Behnken was sitting on, and the red light, the side that Doug Hurley was sitting on. It's actually made pretty quick work getting away from the station. Gonna look up some data, see if I can get the actual distance to station right now.
And departure burn 1 has begun, that 20-second burn.
Okay.
This will also take it outside of the keep out sphere and outside of the approach ellipsoid, and after complete,
Dragon SpaceX depart burn 1 complete. Nominal burn, you are go to doff your suits per procedure 4.012. Reminder that the ground will be deactivating the big loop following exit from the approach ellipsoid, which is approximately 12 to 14 minutes from now.
Okay. So guys, yeah, those.
Okay.
Yeah, so those.
Station Endeavour on the big loop.
Okay.
Go ahead, Endeavour. Chris, we just can't thank you enough. It's been an honor and a privilege to be part of Expedition 63 with you, Anatoly, and Ivan. It's been a great 2 months, and we appreciate all you've done as a crew to help us prove out Dragon on its maiden flight. I'd also like to thank Zeb and his team in Mission Control in Houston for the incredible amount of work they did to make the dock to op successful for Dragon, and also the teams at SpaceX that keep us going towards the end of our mission that we look forward to splashdown tomorrow. I'd also like to wish you a great success on the rest of your expedition and a safe flight home in the fall. Take care, friend.
Endeavour, thank you, Chris. Thank you, Anatoly. Thank you, Ivan. Thank you, Houston, and thank you, SpaceX.
Well, there we had the
Endeavour Station, Bob and Doug wholeheartedly agree with those sentiments. It's been a real pleasure. It's been an honor to serve with you. Safe travels and have a successful landing. Endeavour's a great ship. Godspeed.
Endeavour copies all. Thanks, Chris.
Here we go, guys. That was a little communication between them.
And we just heard some kind words exchanged between Crew Dragon and Endeavour, with Bob Behnken and Doug Hurley now on their way home.
ISS and Dragon on the big loop. Endeavour has exited the keep out sphere. See you guys when you're back home.
Okay. So it has exited the keep out sphere, which is 200 meter in diameter.
Behnken and Hurley leaving behind 3 people aboard the International Space Station that will return this October. That's Station Commander Chris Cassidy, Anatoly Ivanishin, and Ivan Wagner of Roscosmos. So you just heard they exited the keep out sphere. That's an imaginary sphere, 200 meters in diameter, and that is around the space station. So it's one of the several safety zones set up to govern any visiting spacecraft either arriving or departing the station. Before moving into the keep out sphere, spacecraft have to be configured where they would not cross that boundary for at least 4 orbits, even if, as we mentioned, the spacecraft were to, for some reason, lose all of its maneuvering capabilities.
Yeah, and that capability, really what we're looking to hear is that the spacecraft is what's called on what's a, I am having such a hard time saying that.
You'll get there.
It's on a 24-hour safe free drift trajectory. And that's what the call that we're hoping to hear from. So exactly as you mentioned, Leah, if we were to completely lose commanding authority over the spacecraft, we would want to make sure that we wouldn't potentially re-interact with the International Space Station in an uncontrolled way. And so these burns helping us to get out and away from the space station in a way that we could, if something were to go catastrophically wrong on the vehicle, protect the crew aboard the space station, of course the crew aboard the spacecraft until you were able to recover. Of course, Dragon spacecraft has been really rock solid this entire mission and has a lot of redundancy into it. So that scenario is pretty unlikely, but it's a good safety standard that we design all of our spacecraft to.
And this departure burn 0 and 1, as we mentioned, is bringing Dragon up and over the International Space Station. It's not just making a straight journey home. That will be determined later once the phasing burn is complete, and then the deorbit burn, which commits us to leaving space to bringing Bob Behnken and Doug Hurley back into Earth. The next...
Dragon on Dragon to ground comm check with the cabin mic.
I hear you loud and clear on Dragon to ground. How me?
Loud and clear, Anna.
As we heard, they are now testing out the cabin mic, so they may be beginning to doff their suits, take off their suits, which is allowed now that the first 2 departure burns have been completed. And the next is scheduled for 5:27 p.m. Pacific time. That'll be depart burn 2, and that'll be 12:27 a.m. GMT. So it's really the middle of the night for the space station crew right now, and they'll be getting ready to go to sleep pretty soon. But our astronauts are awake for several more hours before they get their sleep period later.
Of course, they all got a chance to take a quick sleep shifting nap to be alert and awake for these operations. And, you know, as you mentioned, the crew are in the middle of doffing or getting out of their suits. That was a pretty dynamic period of time around the station, a time where there could have been a potential depressurization, or if there were any problems with the thruster, we would want the crew suited. Of course, with that big burn out of the way and Dragon now on a confirmed trajectory away from the space station on its way out, close to exiting the approach ellipsoid, Bob and Doug can get out of those spacesuits and get into something a little bit more comfortable. And that test step of verifying the cabin mic, the spacesuits actually have 2 microphones in them just towards the, near the jaw, actually in the base of the helmet. And so with Bob and Doug removing those spacesuits, they're testing their cabin mic just to make sure that they still have good communications with the crew operations responsible engineer here in Hawthorne. So we should expect a few more calls here as Dragon moves away from the approach ellipsoid. We heard a couple of calls from the Capcom as well about deactivating the big loop, so to speak, and transitioning to Dragon to ground. The big loop is a comm network that connects flight controllers and Mission Control Houston, the International Space Station crew, visiting vehicles, and of course, like our Mission Control team here in Hawthorne, all together on one comm loop so we can all communicate with one another if anything needs immediate attention. As we step out of integrated operations or joint operations with the International Space Station, we'll transition into Mission Control here in Hawthorne, having mission authority, and transition all of those calls to the Dragon to ground loop.
Yeah, so life on space station is kind of back to normal now that Dragon has departed, and they are still monitoring the departure. The crew on board Crew Dragon is specifically, and I can imagine that the astronauts aboard the space station might be looking out and getting a final last view of Dragon before it returns to Earth, maybe in those bay windows, that cupola window we have on the International Space Station. Now, as we mentioned, Dragon is outside the keep-out sphere, and it is a little more than 500 meters away from the International Space Station. So we'll be looking for it to exit the approach ellipsoid coming up here in about 6 minutes.
Yeah, right now, Dragon moving away just under 1 meter per second, or close to like 3 feet per second away from the space station. And as it really starts to get further and further away, that speed will pick up a little bit until we get into an orbit where eventually we will have our highest point of our orbit be about 10 kilometers below the space station. And coming up after that approach ellipsoid exit, we'll also have 3 more burns scheduled for today, so 2 more departure burns as well as a departure phasing burn. And then that should button up the major activities for today, and Bob and Doug will hopefully be able to get some rest before a pretty exciting day tomorrow.
Yes, I can imagine they are very excited, and tomorrow they'll wake up and then several more milestones to look forward to, including, as we mentioned, that deorbit burn, that final commitment to bringing them home. Because if there were a change in potentially the weather over the next several hours, we would still be able to have Bob Behnken and Doug Hurley in Earth's orbit, and they have enough crew supplies on board that they could stay there until a couple of days. That way we would have an opportunity for the weather to clear or for us to find another splashdown site. But everything's looking good for us to come home to Pensacola tomorrow.
Right now on your screen, views of Mission Control. On the right-hand side, this team is Mission Control in Houston. And on the left-hand side of your screen is Mission Control in Hawthorne. Currently still in joint operations as we're still in the approach ellipsoid. And as we transition out of that 4 kilometer by 2 kilometer ellipse, we will transition Mission Authority to the Mission Director here in Hawthorne. While we've been in integrated operations and while we've been attached to the space station, any commands, any operations that we wanted to do on the Dragon spacecraft, of course, we're getting permission from the flight director in Houston to conduct those commands, because the flight control team in Houston really responsible for the health and safety of the crew aboard the International Space Station, as well as the safety and performance of the International Space Station. It's kind of wild to think about it. Sometimes I think about the International Space Station as a destination, but it's really a spaceship. And in fact, earlier this, I think it was about 2 weeks ago, the space station had yawed completely around by adjusting its orbit, and so it was flying backwards, so to speak. So it's a spacecraft just like Dragon, just bigger.
Oh, definitely a spacecraft. It's actually an orbiting laboratory. And so while they were on board, we talked about some of the science that Bob Behnken and Doug Hurley conducted. And while they were there, they completed 114 hours approximately of scientific research aboard the International Space Station. And it's really amazing how much of that benefits life on Earth. The space station obviously is in microgravity, and that gives us an opportunity to test things and to look a little closer at phenomenon that we can't when we're here on Earth. And so the International Space Station has provided countless medical advances and technological advances for us over these past 20 years. And as we mentioned earlier, this is the 20th anniversary of the International Space Station this year. And so it's a big milestone. We'll be celebrating that later in November. And that means there have been people living in space continuously for 20 years. So that's quite a feat. I love that it's international. I love that this is just such a good example of how when we work together, we accomplish something that at one time no one could have ever dreamed of.
Yeah, just reading some of the books by former crew members, I know they like to talk about the food aboard the space station and the sort of the international cultural events that they do between crews. They really consider themselves a big family, and those kind words that we heard between Bob, Doug, and the station crew as leaving sort of shows just how close they became over just a short period of time, just a couple of months.
Guys, so I think I need to end the stream now only. So we'll be back again for the splashdown, and till then, just take care, be healthy, stay safe, and yeah, be good. We'll again meet you with the splashdown stream. Stay safe, stay healthy. This is Rocket. This is Priyanshu Gorohila, and you just watch Rocket Gyan. Stay safe, stay healthy, and bye-bye.